This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10. One more sleep. I've already got the shivers about tomorrow. It's such a weird rule that me and Ferrari and Sheila and everybody on LBC on Thursday, tomorrow, spoiler alert, there's an election, we are not allowed to talk about politics. We're not allowed to say anything that may in any way influence anybody's votes, in any way whatsoever. So I think, I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but I certainly err on the side of caution and try not to mention it at all, except obviously the sort of incontrovertible fact that a general election is happening. But today we can fill our proverbial Sambas. We can fill our Adidas Sambas to the very brim with observations about what has gone before. I felt a thought crystallising yesterday. I felt some of the coverage of that Friday night dinner story was the worst journalism I have ever encountered. I didn't just think it was irresponsible. I thought it was disgusting. To pretend that a man who is about to become Prime Minister would, in the event of anything important or urgent, refuse to engage with his brief and continue instead to consume his chicken soup, as one caller rather winningly put it, was probably a new low. And I thought we were out of new lows. I thought we'd had so many lows that there were no lows left. All the lows had been reached. But then, of course, you find yourself wondering, what on earth can they currently do? The kind of commentators, journalists, columnists, broadcasters who told you that Brexit would be brilliant, that Boris Johnson was a statesman and a stand-up guy, that Liz Truss's financial plans were fantastic, that Rishi Sunak would somehow, despite the fact that they'd been in favour of everything that had gone before, Rishi Sunak would somehow represent a sort of, was it the Augean stables that Hercules diverted a river to clean? Rishi Sunak was going to be the Hercules of 21st century conservatism and redirect the rivers of right-wing rhetoric through the filth-ridden stables left behind by Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. The same people, all of them, all of the most prominent names in the UK media, bar, four of us, probably? All of the most prominent names in the UK. There was a columnist in the Sunday Times this weekend writing, he tried to make a list of all the people in the media that would be celebrating a Labour victory. He came up with Alistair Campbell, Will Hutton and me. I think Will has a column in The Observer. He's certainly got a rather good book out. Alistair Campbell has his podcast, but he doesn't have a column anywhere. All of the kind of media profile achieved has been largely DIY by him. And so you make a list of all the people that would be celebrating a Tory victory on Friday, and we would be here until halfway through Ian Dale's show later this evening. It would be an endless list. It would be an infinite list of major media figures, and they all flogged you Brexit. They all flogged you Boris Johnson. They all flogged you Liz Truss. They all flogged you Rishi Sunak. So when I was wondering yesterday whether that absolutely outrageous coverage of Keir Starmer's dinner arrangements on Fridays, condemned by their own independent advisor on anti-Semitism. These are the words that have almost lost their power and resonance because we've become so used to the corruption and the client journalism. Condemned by their own independent advisor on anti-Semitism. But by this time yesterday, it was literally all they had left. So the idea of new lows, I'm afraid, remains very much alive. Which brings me to the front cover of today's Daily Telegraph. A truly extraordinary exercise in treating readers as if they have single-figure IQs. A recording from March of Darren Jones, one of the senior members of Labour's economy team, revealing the absolutely extraordinary news that they have no plans to change the current policy on inheritance tax that the Tory party has had in place for the last 14 years. How desperate do the right-wing media have to be to pretend to you and to me that that is somehow a story? Like Labour's tax raid, cat let out of bag, say senior Tory. Read the story, and it is literally about a bloke saying, yeah, we've not got any plans to change what the Tories have had in place for the last 14 years. Absolute desperation. I mean, absolute and unbelievable desperation. And I think it's got to be over now, because well, I don't know what's going to be on tomorrow's front pages. If I told you that the Daily Mail this morning had used red ink and deployed the word Starmageddon I don't know, scare you into voting one way or another, I don't even know whether you'd believe me. Amazingly, I've left the Daily Mail upstairs, so I can't even confirm or deny whether that is actually true. So the desperation is something that, even as a tireless chronicler of the corruption that set in during the referendum campaign and isn't going away anytime soon, regardless of who's in Downing Street on Friday, as a tireless chronicler of the Tory party, I am almost reassured by the fact that I can still be shocked. I have feared on occasions, of course, you're absolutely right. Alistair Campbell has a column in the rather splendid New European newspaper, my apologies. I honestly thought I'd reached a point where I could be, I no longer could be shocked. Where I just sort of think, no, yeah, that's what happens in America. Whatever Trump does next, our Supreme Court have decided that he shouldn't actually be held to legal account like everybody else in America. Yeah, that's fine. It's happened in America. But it hasn't happened here, because three things have shocked me in the last 24 hours. The utterly despicable coverage of Keir Starmer's Friday night dinners. The attempts this morning to pretend that Darren Jones, saying several months ago that he had no plans to change the Tory inheritance tax policy, being turned by the worst of client journalists into some sort of manufactured scandal. And the third element of this conversation, the fact that they wheeled out Boris Johnson last night, looking like the sort of love child of Sir Les Patterson and Father Jack from the rather splendid Father Ted televisual entertainment. Wheeling out Boris Johnson. You thought they were desperate when they tried to reanimate the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn. They tried to somehow pin Corbyn on Starmer, despite the fact that Starmer has slung him out of the whole flipping party. So you thought they can't get any more desperate than that. But wheeling out Boris Johnson, and the state of him suggests he may actually have been literally wheeled out to deliver a speech that was such an exercise in proving all of the points that we've examined regularly and frequently on this programme. Boris Johnson coming out and doing a sort of greatest hits of the last 8 years of right-wing politics. Utter hypocrisy, complete lies, hollow's not even a strong enough word, utterly bankrupt rhetoric, the worst kind of rabble-rousing, and an expectation, and this is what's crucial, an expectation from the kind of people we've just been talking about, the kind of people who were trying to manufacture outrage about Keir Starmer's dinner arrangements, or pretend this morning that Darren Jones has said anything interesting at all about inheritance tax. They still expect Johnson to move the needle. Rishi Sunak obviously wouldn't have agreed to this unless they honestly thought that Boris Johnson could in some way move the needle. Boris Johnson, who was chased out of Downing Street by his own cabinet, almost every minister in his government resigned in protest at his debauchery, at his moral bankruptcy. And yet they haven't got a plan B. We haven't got another path to go. Was Suella Braverman today writing an article which is the very essence of whatever the opposite of traditional conservatism is. Party before everything is the Tory line. She's waving a white flag, again in the Daily Telegraph, and accepting defeat and condemning her colleagues already for the campaign that they've fought. A woman who's got the extraordinary achievement of having been sacked by at least 2 of the last 4 Tory prime ministers, although my memory doesn't stretch to whether or not she managed to get sacked by more than that. So I think today we'll start with Johnson, right? I think we'll start with Johnson because he sums up so much of what we have been talking about together for the last 5 years, since he became Prime Minister, but obviously long before that as well. It has been pointed out to me by David in Bradford that it is a biological impossibility for Sir Les Patterson and Father Jack, actually, David, to be correct. If you're going to be pedantic, you need to mind your P's and Q's to actually have a love child. You make an excellent point, but I think it's an acceptable figure of speech. Speaking of biological impossibilities, of course, that's the other sign of how desperate the client media is. They keep asking Labour politicians about toilets. Pat McFadden, I heard this morning, actually say, well, what do people do at the moment? I mean, what's wrong with what currently goes on? Toilets, Keir Starmer, toilets. Just absolutely extraordinary what we have been brought to by the people who sold you Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, the people who sort of eat the Daily Mail for breakfast every morning and the Daily Telegraph. So here is a line from Boris Johnson's speech last night. If you want uncontrolled immigration, mandatory wokery and kowtowing to Brussels, then go right ahead and vote for Starmer. I mean, I had a very entertaining drink the other night with Chris de Burgh, who's a lovely man and a brilliantly talented musician. And he was telling me about that guy on Stars in Their Eyes who did Chris de Burgh. He came on and he did Lady in Red. And he revealed to me, it was quite a poignant story, actually, because Chris has been in showbiz for 50 years. He's written more songs than you've had hot dinners. The man's a legend. But when that fellow won Stars in Their Eyes, they thought that he would be able to go on a tour. But he only had one song. He could only do that one song. That's what the Tories are now. They are like a Stars in Their Eyes tribute act to themselves, but they've only got one hit. It's madness. Absolute madness. So, what do you think Boris Johnson's legacy is? And I want you to think about this. Because Boris Johnson's legacy is much more than that picture of the Queen at her own husband's funeral, sitting alone while he was hosting parties galore in the heart of government. Boris Johnson's legacy is Suella Braverman today in the Daily Telegraph launching an attack upon her own party the day before a general election. Boris Johnson's legacy is rhetoric about uncontrolled immigration, mandatory wokery and kowtowing to Brussels, which could have been a speech he gave in 2015 or 2010. We have left the European Union largely as a consequence of his moral corruption. What on earth is his legacy? And the question that might help you zone in on that is this. Why would anybody anywhere, how could anybody anywhere think that Boris Johnson could somehow bolster Tory fortunes? The current leader of the Conservative Party was one of the first to wield the knives that finally did for Johnson's premiership. The idea that things have become so bent, so completely corrupted, that the same people who got rid of him, desperation doesn't come close to describing what we're articulating here. I watch the people who got rid of him, who finally tired of his moral bankruptcy, his epic debauchery, his boundless self-regard. They finally tired of it. His weapons-grade dishonesty. And now the situation is apparently so dire that they're going to bring him back to make a speech. Listen, anybody who is still falling for Boris Johnson's shtick and grift has already signed up to Nigel Farage's shtick and grift. There's literally nobody left poised to vote Conservative who's going to be tempted to do so by a Boris Johnson speech. They've already gone all in with the Brexit 2.0 or whatever the latest lies of Farage's may be. Don't let me go home today without telling you what one of their candidates has said about autism. You'll be shocked but not surprised, I suspect. So what is Boris Johnson's legacy? 0345 6060 for the country, for the Tory party, for the client media, actually, who in many ways, like he has treated women and lovers and wives and mistresses throughout his life, the people that he had most successfully seduced end up being the people most effectively traduced by his utter contempt for anybody but himself. Imagine how I suppose one thinks of Nadine Dorries at this point, the kind of character that would still be waving a Boris Johnson flag, whether in the Tory party itself or in the client media that have propelled them to this 14-year debacle, destruction of so much that was great about our country. And there it is. And there it is. Let's bring him back and stick him in front of the party faithful because, Johnson's still our boy. He's still got it. What's his legacy? What does Boris Johnson tell you about the state of the country? 0345 6060 973. About the state of the Tory party. Or indeed about your relationship with politics. 0345 6060 973. I was a little worried. People kept wondering whether or not I was worried about the prospect of a Labour government, which, by the way, hasn't happened yet. All I can say to you is make sure you vote. Vote, vote, vote. Whether I'd be worried because it's bad for business. I've been saying for about 8 years I'd be quite happy to have a little bit less to talk about, see the career dial down a couple of notches if the trade-off is that my country starts rehabilitating and recovering from the mess that has been inflicted upon us by these sociopaths and hooligans. But in fact, I can't wait to see what happens next to the Tory party. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating exercise in politics, arguably even more interesting than the question of what Keir Starmer will do if he does achieve power tomorrow. But Johnson, the biggest figure of the last 10 years, certainly the biggest figure of the Tory turnaround, those sugar rushes of Brexit and the 2019 election victory, turning out, of course, to deliver the mother of all hangovers, which is where we are now and where the Tory party are for at least one more leadership cycle. I would say at least two more leadership cycles before someone can say, Brexit was a terrible mistake. We need to rebuild the party from the ground up. That ain't happening anytime soon. But what do you think Boris Johnson's legacy is? And do you want to have a crack at explaining to someone who's just woken up from a 6-month coma or a 2-year coma, someone who's been asleep for the duration of Rishi Sunak's premiership but remembers how they got rid of Boris Johnson? Do you want to have a crack at explaining to them how the hell anybody anywhere could have thought that wheeling him out like a sort of plummy-voiced Wurzel Gummidge, how wheeling Boris Johnson out could in any way help revive Tory fortunes? It's 20 minutes after 10. I'll miss these monologues about Boris Johnson. I rarely enjoy myself as much in the studio as when I have the enormous privilege of being able to show you what so much of my profession has criminally neglected to show you and tell you for the last however many years. Just to point out the realities of his depravity, to point to the proof, the evidence, the facts that show he should never have been allowed anywhere near the heart of power. Because I presume he's toast. You never know. But the idea that the people who got rid of him could, within a 2 or 3 year window, arrive at the conclusion that bringing him back would revive their fortunes is probably the final proof of just how much he has broken, or just how much at least is broken. That'll do. Could go for past. A couple of you reminding me that the day after his dismissal from Downing Street, I did, I think, give the longest one ever, did I? Did I reach the past news without pausing? I went 27 minutes past 10. I can't go there today. It's 21 minutes after 10. I'll call it quits. I'll open up the phone lines. I'll wait for you to tell me what Boris Johnson has done to Britain. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
24 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mike says it was 42 minutes, including the news, the day after we got rid of Johnson. So I'm nowhere near my personal best today. So we went to the news at past. I came back and carried on. It's a miracle anyone still listens to this, Bilge, honestly. Luckily you do. And today, well, you know what we're asking. Boris Johnson. Make sense of it. Rodney's in Bath to start. Rodney, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, you said what has Boris done for Britain, and actually, I think that we should actually be incredibly grateful to him in many ways. And I realise that might be a controversial opinion, but despite some of the things, Brexit, bringing politics into a complete disrepute.
Yes, and disarray. I think you got caught there between disrepute and disarray, didn't you? And you sort of tried to say both words at the same time. No, I like it. I like it a lot. There should be a combination.
What's the word? A portmanteau. Anyway,
a portmanteau word, yes.
But listen, the reason that I'm saying with Orson said should actually be grateful is that I think that basically he brought about the destruction of the Tories. You know, the guy was awarded a big majority, a huge majority. He was fanfared in. He was so popular in 2019. He was the golden boy. And so quickly, you know, in a matter of a couple of years leading up to now, he's basically led to the... Please hold.
I think that Rodney may have accidentally pressed the wrong button on his phone, but I like that sound effect. That wasn't me, by the way. I'm Keith's in charge of the buttons, as you know. From Rodney to Rob in Falmouth. Rob, what would you like to say? I just realised that, in a way, Rodney's focused on a question I should have probably asked already, which is where did it all go so wrong? But you're here to talk about Johnson. What would you like to say, Rob?
Just coming back on what... The man is an absolute vile, disgusting creature who shouldn't be allowed any airtime. Whilst that man was partying during COVID lockdown, James, do you know what I was doing? While he was breaking COVID rules, do you want to know what I was doing, James?
Tell me.
I was choosing 12 people to attend my 16-year-old son's funeral. While he was in Downing Street partying, I was obeying COVID rules and restrictions and choosing 12 people to attend my 16-year-old son's funeral. That man is a vile human being who shouldn't be allowed any airtime and should completely be dismissed by absolute everyone in the United Kingdom. He is absolutely vile, and he sums up absolute everything wrong with the United Kingdom at this moment in time.
What? I'm so sorry for your loss, and everybody listening will join me in that.
And not only that, I'll tell you another story as well. I also knew someone else who, whilst COVID lockdown, her husband was in Derriford Hospital in Plymouth dying. She wasn't allowed to go and see her husband because of COVID restrictions, and he was also partying. Now you tell me about that man. He is an absolutely vile human being, and he shouldn't be allowed any airtime. He shouldn't be allowed
I hear you. I want you to focus on one element of this for me, if you would, which is the thought processes that led Rishi Sunak and the Tory leadership and everybody in the high command to think, I know what will help. I know what will turn things around for us. Let's give Boris Johnson a ring. How could that have even happened?
I can't get my head around it. I've been listening to it this morning. We was talking about it at work this morning. And I cannot see in any universe how any reasonably intelligent people thinking that bringing Boris Johnson back and putting him on telly and in the press helps them, because all it does for me is sum up everything that is wrong with the Conservative Party and the damage that they have done to the United Kingdom. That's what it does for me when you bring him forward and put him up.
It does two things. It does exactly what you describe, and it does that for me as well, although I don't have anything like
it makes me physically sick, James. It really, really does. What that man done to me, and he did do that to me because he was the one who implemented COVID restrictions, and then he's partying, and then I had to do what I done. I absolutely cannot stand the man, what he stands for, and the damage that he's done to this country. And I simply cannot comprehend the Conservatives wheeling him out to speak to people thinking it's going to gain votes. I'm lost for words, James.
You're certainly not lost for words, Rob. If you
James, if I wanted to really say what I wanted to say,
and I'm very grateful to you. I've got enough on my plate with Ofcom tomorrow. I've got enough on my plate. Final question.
Diplomatic.
Final question. What were your politics like before 2019? If I could ask that question, how did you swing?
More to the left of the political spectrum, to be honest with you.
No, fair enough. But this is obviously for you a complete game changer. And sometimes, Rob, the passion in the delivery of a contribution to the programme is somehow even louder than the actual content of the words. Although in your case, it would be a pretty stiff competition. I am so sorry to have resurrected these thoughts with my choice of topic this morning, to have resurrected these memories. But it is, I think, and I know that you'd agree, it's important to record just how utterly depraved Johnson is and was, and how utterly illustrative of the national malaise it is that the party of government might still think, I know what we'll do. We'll wheel him out. Party boy. It's coming up to 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're looking at the, what would you even call it? Chaos? Is that the right word? Hellscape? Detritus of the Tory party election campaign, peaking, presumably, the horror peaking with Boris Johnson appearing on a stage last night to make a truly ridiculous speech that reads like the greatest hits of Brexit lies, the greatest hits of Boris Johnson's moral debauchery, and believing that somehow swathes of the country were still sufficiently stupid to swallow it. Well, not Rob and not me. But feel free to ring me and tell me why you today are actually more likely to vote Conservative, having been reminded of what went before via the corporeal presence of Alexander de Pfeffel Boris Johnson. It's 10:30. You're listening to LBC, and Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. It was a distillation in many ways of what has happened over the last few years. The idea that the poster boy for almost everything that's gone wrong would be wheeled out by the Tories in a sort of desperate hope of reversing their dismal fortunes. And then he would do all the things you'd expect him to do, tell lies about Keir Starmer, to speak nonsense about Brussels, use the word wokery without explaining what it means, and even accused Nigel Farage of being in Vladimir Putin's pocket, which is a valid accusation, of course. We know that Nigel Farage is a huge fan of Vladimir Putin and of Andrew Tate as well, and of Donald Trump, of course, and indeed of Liz Truss. But Boris Johnson doesn't get to lecture other people on being too close to Russia. He put the son of a KGB spy in the House of Lords. Dispatched his security team on his way back from a NATO summit to party in Italy with said KGB spy, currently sanctioned by Canada and others as a consequence of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, for being a member of Putin's inner circle. That's what I mean when I talk about Johnson. That's what I mean. It's this enormous, it's not just baggage. It's like a mail train of freight that comes with him. And these clowns, these corrupt clowns in the Conservative Party and the media, they have let it all go. He can stand up in front of a cheering crowd and accuse Nigel Farage of being too close to Vladimir Putin when he refused to sanction a proper inquiry into Russian influence over, for example, the referendum result. The maddest moment for me this week, and there's a lot of competition, it's been the Daily Mail running a report on Australian media looking into how Russian-funded and Russian-sponsored Facebook groups are now shilling for the Reform UK Limited, without mentioning Brexit, or without mentioning that their hero, Boris Johnson, was the only person, with the possible exception of Theresa May, who could actually have blown the lid off how Russian influence was reaching into the furthest tentacles of your Facebook feed or your Auntie Doris's Facebook page. So the sheer blatant hypocrisy of the man is not the story. The story is the free pass that it gets. And I would say, and I could be wrong about this, but anybody still falling for this, anybody either untroubled by the corruption or unconcerned by the lies, anybody still indulging in ignorant nativist snarls because thinking is too hard for them, surely they've all signed up for Farage's latest bandwagon. So who the hell was Johnson supposed to be appealing to? The waverers? I don't know. But God, does he sum up the bigger problem, the broader malaise, the deeper issues. Lorraine's in Whitehaven in Cumbria. Lorraine, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Lorraine.
First of all, can I say a massive, heartfelt thank you for keeping my hope intact until the day before the election through some very, very dark times. I can't thank you enough.
Well, I can't thank you enough for that. It's not over yet, but no, I'll accept that. I normally blush, but I will accept that. But thank you for keeping me company while I've done that, Lorraine.
Yes, okay. The angle I'm coming at this from is I'm a former deputy head teacher, and I've spent my life educating teenagers. I'm retired now, retired in the last few years. And whenever I told people I was a teacher, the next question they would say to me, "Oh, what age group do you teach?"
Yes.
And I would say, "Oh, I teach the big ones. I love teaching teenagers." And without fail, everybody would always say, "Oh my God, I couldn't teach them. How do you manage to control, unruly teenagers?" And I used to say, well, there's two things basically that work in a school with young people. One is appealing to their decency and their sense of decency, and the other one is consequences. And I used to have in my classroom a big poster that said, "Every time you make a choice, it will have a consequence. Make the right choice." And I just had to point to that poster, and that was usually enough to get people thinking about what they were doing and their consequences of their actions. And the reason I don't use the word hate lightly, I hate what Johnson has done to our country, because he has destroyed the decency at all levels of life that underpins a respectable and developed existence. And in terms
civilization, civilized discourse or civilized conduct.
Exactly, civilized. Yes. He's destroyed it. You don't have to look very far to find people now treating each other with such a lack of decency, whether it's migrants, whether it's trans people, whether it's the tofu, wokarati. I've been called all sorts simply because I happen to believe we should live in a fairer society.
And he tried to hit all those marks again last night, didn't he?
He did. He went for them again last night. And the other big thing is consequences. And I do not believe that these politicians who behave in this way understand the long-term impact, the lack of consequences of their personal behaviour, their parliamentary behaviour has on the young people of the country. Because how can you turn around to a young person and say, you must do the right thing? If you do something bad, if you break the law, if you cheat, there will be a consequence, because they look around them now and they look in the press, they look online, they look in Parliament, and young people are they do listen politically, and they are aware of what is going on. And if they take their lead from the cabal,
from the leader,
Prime Minister,
from the leaders,
exactly, and for Johnson to have been the Prime Minister, the best of us, which is what that is supposed to be, the prime. I just am so angry, and I do not know how we get that back. And I really, really hope Keir Starmer has a strong stomach and has the mettle. I think he has, because he's run an amazing campaign in not giving them anything to bat him down with. But I really do hope he doesn't let us down, and he fights for the young people to get back in this country inclusiveness, decency, morality, whatever you want to label it, whatever your political persuasion. It's not about politics.
No,
it's about decency.
Do you know what it's about?
And how we live our lives.
It's about the network of obligation that binds us all.
Exactly.
Do you know where I got that phrase from?
I don't.
I got it from a letter that his classics master at Eton sent to his father. And he said, I think he honestly believes that it is churlish of us not to regard him as an exception, one who should be free of the network of obligation that binds everyone else.
And it's almost as if once he got into power, it opened the doors for all the others that have come after him.
That's the point. And that's the point. That's the Suella Braverman in the article today in the Daily Telegraph, attacking her own colleagues already before the results are even in. So self-interest, self-promotion, self-advancement, prioritised over absolutely everything else. I thought Liz Truss was the best example of that. When other people watched Boris Johnson's lies and the casualness with which he could, the contempt even with which he could treat obvious truth, self-evident truth, he would treat with complete contempt. It got him all the way into Downing Street. Many people recoiled at that. Liz Truss was taking notes, and it turns out that Suella Braverman was as well.
And then the biggest disappointment for me, and I wouldn't vote Conservative because I don't believe in on the basis on which the Conservative Party operates, even before Johnson.
Yes.
But I did actually feel hopeful when Sunak stood on the steps of Downing Street and said he was going to try to restore some of the things that he believed had been lost. And that turned out to be another lie. And it just goes on and on and on. And I do worry about the long-term damage that this period of our political history is going to leave for the young people of our country.
Well, you just how much is broken, like not seeing the scale of the damage done by the tsunami until the tide actually goes out again, I think, is one way of thinking about it.
It's difficult to undo a lot of the damage that has been done, but we can only try.
And that is a question for Keir Starmer, and possibly a question for us all to have a look at in the coming days and weeks. But yes, I think that recognition of the sheer scale of the damage done is still a long way off for a lot of people, not least because when Boris Johnson turned up looking as if he'd made his way into the hall through several hedges last night, he was greeted with near euphoria by Tory campaigners and politicians. So just reflect upon what Rob said about his late son. Reflect upon what Lorraine has said as a retired deputy head teacher, mourning, if you like, the passing of standards, the simple truth that rules are important, the universally held principle that standards matter, the network of obligation that binds everyone. Just reflect upon what they said and then listen to these people who are still, if you like, on the, what would you call it, I wonder, the bandwagon that Boris Johnson built. It's more than a bandwagon, but here they are.
Thank you so much, everyone. Can I first of all say how wonderful it is to see you all again. I feel deprived of your company, and how grateful I am to all of you for everything that you've been doing over the last few weeks, and for coming so late tonight to this venue, way past Keir Starmer's bedtime.
Still lapping it up. Only question really as we head towards the polls tomorrow is how many people are still lapping it up.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:47 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the love coming in for my callers is almost boundless, and quite rightly so. You listen to those people cheering Johnson with the words of Rob ringing in your ears, and his memory of having to choose the 12 people to attend his 16-year-old son's funeral, while Johnson, who had introduced those rules, was partying in Downing Street and presiding over a culture of absolute debauchery. And then, of course, remember, he stood up in front of the House of Commons and said there weren't any parties. There categorically hadn't been any parties. And then he stood up in the House of Commons and said there had been some parties, but he had been completely unaware of them. And then he stood up in the House of Commons and said that there had been some parties and he had actually been aware of them and he was very sorry, but he definitely hadn't attended any of them. And then he stood up in the House of Commons and said, there had been some parties and he had actually been aware of them and he had actually attended them, but when he was attending them, he hadn't actually realised they were parties. And he still gets greeted like this. I don't want to hear it all. I just want to get the early bars of this. The man who lied and lied and lied again, while people like Rob were arranging the funerals of their children and having to limit the attendance to 12. Who the fudge are these people?
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Who are they? Who are they? Jamie's in Muswell Hill. Jamie, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, Jamie.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, you were just saying about the House of Commons, and it kind of segued rather nicely into my point in terms of the House of Columns, as in I think the columns that Johnson wrote in the Times and Tory Graph or whatever.
Mostly the Telegraph and the Spectator back in the day, I think.
Right, okay, but I think they were the warning shots that kind of did a Back to the Future style skewing of the timeline, where we all woke up and Biff was. He's kind of a Biff-type character, whereby I suppose my more serious
Biff from
point
Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Do you know that that was genuinely, and I'm not making this up, the scriptwriter has said that was actually based on Donald Trump.
I think I have read that somewhere, yeah, and it's sort of relevant in both cases.
Yes,
really,
no, there is.
And
there's definitely a resonance there, a resemblance, but that
exactly.
kind of moral debauchery is what we're describing.
Well, yes, but actually also in terms of what he wrote, I'm actually specifically sort of referring to where he was calling, women who wear burqas bank robbers and looking like pillar boxes. Yes, yeah. And then he was saying, people from African nations having, pickaninnies with watermelons.
Smiling. Yeah.
I know, and I was just reflecting on this actually with my partner earlier, and having had some years to reflect on this, and I thought, why, if you were of from an ethnic minority background, as actually many conservative cabinet members are and have been, which is obviously a great thing, but why would you want to have, why would you be okay with that? And so I feel like the calibre of politicians, and this was being talked about, I did Ben Kenshaw, Ian Dale's show the other day, I can't remember who it was. The calibre has just sort of plummeted. I think it all kind of almost started from that point, the kind of the Johnson brand inserting himself into politics, having come from, a background of writing some quite racist...
I suppose in a way it clears the space that Farage now inhabits, doesn't it? The idea of that. Because the thing that they both do is portray a very middle-class misogyny or xenophobia or nativism or racism, whichever phrase you disturb. But I mean, in Johnson's case, arguably upper middle class, having gone to Eton. But what Farage does is pretend that these concerns, these bigotries, these prejudices are somehow working class. And that is a really ugly element of legacy that isn't going to go away because... Farage is likely to have quite a good day tomorrow, I imagine. And yet, without Johnson, somehow, and don't forget, they were joined at the hip in the last general election. The 80-seat majority was in large part delivered by Nigel Farage. And so the idea that he then, in this speech, starts taking swings at Farage is yet more evidence of the man's complete hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
Complete hypocrisy.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
What happened, do you think, in the minds of... I don't know that I've got the stomach, given what Rob shared with us earlier, to analyse the kind of people that were chanting his name last night. But the simple question of how could the people who rightly got rid of him have ended up last night thinking that the way to turn around their own fortunes would be to bring him back?
Well, it's desperation, as you were saying in your intro. I think that's literally the only word that could be used, because why else would they? I mean, he was essentially a pariah, in the eyes of, as you said earlier, the whole cabinet pretty much. They were just leaving in their droves, and now suddenly he's welcomed home as some kind of hero of the right wing.
It's a mark of how broken everything is, actually. You're right. I mean, it is just proof that none of the old standards apply anymore. None of the old truisms or truths actually apply anymore. You can do that. It makes sense in this mad universe that they've created, this utterly bonkers ecosystem that has been in place since the referendum was called by David Cameron, where truth does not matter. Standards do not matter. Rules do not matter. You take that to its apotheosis on the other side of the Atlantic, where it becomes laws do not apply to our leader, to our cult leader. The laws should not apply to our leader. Thankfully, we're a long way off that in this country, albeit that we have our sort of pound shop version of Donald Trump agitating for attention at the moment. 10:53 is the time. Thank you, Jamie. Chris is in Chigwell. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Hello. Thank you for having me on as well.
You're very welcome.
Bit of a sensitive one, and I'm going to be quick, basically.
Yeah.
I think a couple of callers back was Paul, was it? Mentioned about his son, obviously.
Rob, it was Rob in Falmouth.
Rob,
yeah,
sorry, that's one.
Right.
Yeah, sorry to hear about your loss, Rob, and obviously all the other callers out there that have lost someone as well. So the reason for my call today is I lost my dad in the COVID time. We had COVID, so we couldn't go and see him. My dad essentially died within 48 hours of catching COVID. Died at 61 years old. Died on his own in a room with a doctor.
I'm sorry.
To the point where we all had to have sort of FaceTime calls. Sorry.
Hey, take your time.
So basically, Boris Johnson, I hate the guy. I'm so sorry.
Hey, don't apologise to me or anybody listening to this programme. You can't separate that man from your tragedy?
No. And he's left, obviously, there's 4 boys.
Yeah.
But anyway, listen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My mum's on her own as well now. And I literally hate this guy.
And they are chanting his name. Can I ask, and listen, don't answer this if you don't want to, but where were you politically in, say, I don't know, 2018, 2019? Where was...
We were with Tories.
Right.
And I mean, I wouldn't have them in... If there was a tick box, I would be none of the above, which I think a lot of people said before. Just, it's very difficult. I don't know why people are chanting his name.
No,
it's
no, why, actually. I do this for a living.
That's exactly that. And again, I apologise for being who I am, but
don't apologise.
So many people have just literally forgotten about COVID. It's like it's just disappeared, and that was it. We've gone through a massive pandemic that we're never going to see again, sort of thing. And everyone's just, being as normal as they are, but
how bad it was, and the price that was paid by everyone but him. I think you and Rob have reminded us of that in an almost unbearable fashion, Chris. If I were to speak for myself, an almost unbearable fashion. Thank you, and God bless. 10:56 is the time. Boris. What? I mean, it's worse than Chris described, actually. I don't know whether you've picked up on this, but the almost denialism now, the claims, I saw one last night, and these people have moved towards, there's quite a few Reform UK Limited candidates who've been busted for sharing these sort of thoughts on social media, the idea that COVID was not, I don't know if it goes as far as to say a hoax, but it was just a cold or it was just flu or so. I mean, it's as if that death toll didn't happen. See some vile responses to reports of long COVID as well, and Johnson helped unleash that. Because if the truth no longer matters, and you may not be responsible for that lie over there, but the fact that that lie over there is not being called out, cut off at the knees, treated with the contempt that it deserves, that's on the king of the liars. That's on the people that allowed his lies to go unchecked because they wanted to leave the European Union or they wanted the Tories to win a general election. All the other lies that grow up in Boris Johnson's wake are a consequence of not holding him to account, not insisting that he abide by what his classics teacher described when he was 16 years old as the network of obligation that binds everyone else. Talk about legacy, you talk about that. Catherine is in Muswell Hill. Catherine, what would you like to say?
Yeah, well, I want to say something which is, well, maybe a little different from this. I hate Johnson just as much as every single one of your callers has expressed, and incredibly emotionally and movingly. And I have been, I'm a staunch Remainer. I oppose every single thing he stands for. But I have begun to ask myself in the last few days whether, in some perverse and bizarre way, he and Farage have saved us, inadvertently, certainly not deliberately, from the worst excesses of populism, right-wing populism that we're seeing in Europe. And I, for one, I listened to the head teacher you had on a few calls ago talking about consequences. I thought she was excellent. What that made me think is, actually, I feel very heartened by how incredibly energetically and seemingly unanimously we are as a country rejecting that populism, those lies, that
I don't know who is in that constituency of people still voting for the Tory party, but the people attracted by Farage's rhetoric, between that classic figure of between 15 and 20% of the electorate, that unfortunately gives the lie to your claim of unanimity. But it does...
Okay, you're right. Unanimity is ridiculous.
Consensus. It distinguishes us from, for example, France, where that figure is close to double now.
But that's a hugely important distinction to be able to draw.
Yes, it is. You're absolutely right. We've had a little look over the precipice, and there's Boris Johnson waving back at us.
So unlike the head teacher, and I had the
Lorraine.
greatest interest and respect to what she was saying, especially if I'm a mother of a teenager myself, and I was listening, taking notes as to her advice.
Yes.
I did think, actually, I don't think that it's left the door open for more of the same. I think it's made people think, my goodness,
how terrifyingly dangerous to let that into our public lives, to let that into our homes.
I think you're glass half full, aren't you?
Well,
and Lorraine, perhaps, and Lane. No, I mean they're both equally valid positions. I oscillate between the two almost, depending on my mood or depending on whether I've had breakfast. You want to believe that we've had a little look at how bad things can be when you put a populist in charge, or a very long and horrible look, as Chris and Rob have reminded us. But if Starmer isn't up to sniff, or if circumstances conspire to create problems Starmer can't even begin to solve, then the space in which populists can flourish like bacteria in a petri dish grows exponentially, as we both know. But for now, Catherine, I'll take your glass half full, if I may.
Very welcome to it.
Thank you very much. We're going to need 2 straws. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 11. I nearly said I love you then. I don't know why. I found myself quite moved by the last... Well, not quite moved. I found myself very moved by the last hour. And judging by my inbox, we've as we always, when we end up in that place, we're not expecting to or planning to, but we stumbled into quite a warm space during that hour. A space where we wanted to put an arm around each other, or offer up words of comfort to people who've suffered more than we have. But the reminders of the attitude towards one of the key architects of that suffering was pretty harrowing, actually, and pretty significant that this lot, they still think that Johnson is some sort of electoral tonic, and it is odd. That is populism. I want to talk about something different now. I want to talk about the election campaign. A couple of things occur to me. The first thing that occurs to me, and I don't know whether you've noticed this, it's become so clear during the last couple of days when the desperation of client media and Tory, not just Tory, but their reliance on client media historically. I mean, the Sun hasn't really come out for anybody yet. Their front page today features a former footballer. They just don't know what to do. Some of them are still like a chicken that's had its head cut off and carries on running around the farmyard. I think that's a true story. I don't think that is biologically inaccurate. But quite a lot of headless chickens in the Tory client media this morning. They just don't really have any relationship. Their body has been detached from their brain, but they're still doing what they always did when their brain was attached to their body. They're just running around silently squawking into the ether, pretending yesterday that Keir Starmer's dinner arrangements were anything other than as innocuous as his curry or Angela Rayner's housing or the donkey sanctuary that his late mother ran at the family home. Pretending this morning that Darren Jones saying we're not planning on changing the Tories' inheritance tax policy is somehow significant or sinister. The desperation is not a big enough word for that. But what it focused my mind on, apart from the depravity of the client media, what it focused my mind on was the success of Starmer's campaign. Now, I don't know that I approve of this campaign. I think that a bit more Clement Attlee might have been helpful, a bit more Nye Bevan, but the calculation has clearly been from the Labour Party that they were going to prioritise not spooking the horses over everything else. Now, we wondered, didn't we, some time ago, who and where the spookable horses were. In fact, I was so taken with the phrase spookable horses that I was toying with the idea of using it for my next band. The spookable horses are now on stage. It's the spookable horses. But look at the weapons that Tories have been reduced to using. Look at that's what's most extraordinary about this. And I know that there is still a lot of love out there on Twitter for Jeremy Corbyn, but what you cannot do is keep handing your opponents weapons. You remember Ed Miliband when he was leader of the Labour Party. Paul Dacre, who was then editor of the Daily Mail, launched a vicious, vituperative and profoundly dishonest attack upon Ed Miliband's dead father. I'll go a little further. Dead war hero, refugee father. Showed his gratitude to the country to which he had fled by joining our armed forces. The Daily Mail was, by the time of that period of the 2015 general election, the Daily Mail was embarked upon a course of such utter amorality that they went after a politician's dead father. Puts the bacon sandwich incident into irrelevance almost, but a lot of people, of course, remember the bacon sandwich. So look how easy it is to give them ammunition. Ed Miliband being hit over the head with a bacon sandwich for the duration of his election campaign. His brother David, of course, had a difficult moment with a banana that haunted him for years. I just think, and then of course Corbyn kept doing things like suggesting that we should ask the Russians to analyse the substance that had been used by Russians to kill a British citizen, Dawn Sturgis, in Salisbury, and various other things. The handing, and I say this with a bit of generosity towards people who still hold a torch for the last leader of the Labour Party. At least we can all agree that his extraordinary facility for handing incredibly powerful weapons to his political and media enemies was like nothing we have ever seen before. Starmer came into that space and has given them nothing. Now, it opens him up to criticisms, which for me are valid but premature, because you want to see what he does with power if he wins. Of course, it opens him up to criticism. The policy offering in the manifesto is a lot more substantive than most people acknowledge, actually, or perhaps even realise, but he hasn't given them a single weapon. That's an absolutely extraordinary achievement. Whether you like it or not, the scale of the achievement is irrefutable. The media environment, the political landscape in which a bacon sandwich could scupper a candidate, in which a dead war hero father could be used as ammunition with which to attack a prime ministerial candidate. The endless avalanche of largely self-inflicted abuse that Jeremy Corbyn was subjected to by the media establishment and by the Conservative Party. And Keir Starmer has stepped into that space. He's been there for 5 years, and he's just conducted, barring some sort of apocalyptic event in the course of today, he has got all the way to a general election. He has conducted an entire general election campaign that has seen his most fully paid up enemies, the most unthinking and biased client journalists, reduced to telling lies about his Friday night dinners, telling lies about his party's inheritance tax policies, and asking endless questions about toilets. That is literally all they've had. That is not an accident. As I say, it opens him up to criticisms of excess caution. I think we started calling it ruthless caution. We weren't quite sure what we meant by that phrase, but I'm pretty clear on what we mean by it now. Ruthless caution. I didn't like the way he treated Diane Abbott, but Diane Abbott would be a weapon with which right-wing media traditionally and historically would hurt him. In fact, the corruption of right-wing media became clear when suddenly they discovered an enormous affection for Diane Abbott. I think Richard Littlejohn wrote an article about, I've always really liked Diane Abbott. I can't believe how badly Keir Starmer is treating her. To take someone who has been, a totem of right-wing media hatred. She's been in receipt of more far-right hatred than any other politician probably in living memory. And because they thought that her treatment by Starmer, which I think was wrong, but these people somehow thought, we can use her treatment by Starmer as something with which to hurt Starmer. Do you see what I mean about weapons? These people have no morals. Spivery, Nye Bevan called it. Absolute spivery. And that was in 1945. Plus ça change, eh? And he has denied them any weapon at all. It's quite incredible. I only really clocked it this morning with the inheritance tax stuff. I thought the Friday night dinner stuff was pathetic, but when I saw that story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph and actually read it, a leaked recording of a bloke saying we're not going to change anything. That's how successful. What would you call it? The denial of ammunition, the denial of weapons for Keir Starmer has been. But it leads us to quite an odd question for this hour. Because when I say to you, what have been the most pivotal moments during this campaign, I don't think you'll come back with anything that involves the Labour leader. Maybe the VAT on private school fees. I could absolutely be wrong about this. I kind of hope I am, actually. I think it would probably be a more interesting conversation if I am wrong. But when I ask you to call me, as I am now doing, 0345 6060973, if I ask you to call me and tell me what are the most pivotal moments of this campaign, I think it's going to be a catalogue of Tory disasters or missteps, mistakes, misjudgments. I could be wrong, but I don't think you're going to ring me and say, it was that time when Keir Starmer did that. Are you? That's the price you pay for ruthless caution, is that by denying your enemies weapons, by keeping their arsenal empty, you kind of surrender your own biggest wins. It's worked, looking at the polls. But when you look at his personal approval ratings, the number of people who greet the prospect of Keir Starmer becoming Prime Minister with glee or joy or enthusiasm is close to negligible. Close to negligible. So I'll ask you the question, and we will find out whether or not I'm right about this. But much more interestingly than whether or not I'm right about something is the question of what are the crucial moments for you. I read a message, actually, and I've got it here from Doug. We've had a pivotal moment on the programme this morning. I suspect you may have noticed it. Doug has written, until the moment you played that clip of the crowd reaction to that vile person, I wasn't going to bother voting tomorrow, James. Now I will be first in line to make sure that the Tories are finished. I am so angry. Writes Doug in response to the Tory high command, the Tory faithful carrying Boris Johnson into a room on their metaphorical shoulders and treating the memories of many people of what happened as a consequence of his catastrophic handling of COVID with complete contempt. So it's a long list, but I think it's worth assembling, and it's obviously the last time we can do that because tomorrow Ofcom rules dictate that we can't really talk about politics. What for you have been, I think probably one each, if that's okay. But of course that means that after someone's mentioned your most pivotal moment, then you're back on the bench. So I just the pivotal moments. It doesn't have to be your personal most pivotal moment, but ideally, like Doug, it will be a moment that actually swung your needle, actually nudged your needle, changed your mind, shifted your convictions, shifted your vote. What was it? What do we think has been the biggest misstep? Because there's always a danger of recentism, if that's even a word. You know, when people ask what are the best albums of all time, and something that's got absolutely no business being in the top 100 comes 8th because it was out last year. I wonder whether I'm slightly over-egging the pudding when I say I think wheeling out Boris Johnson might have just done a hell of a lot more harm than good, but would it be a bigger deal than D-Day? And we'll just go back over the campaign for the time being. We might go back to 2019 in the next hour and ask what the most significant moments are there, although we were close to that in the last hour. But we'll look now at since the election was called, what for you have been the biggest and most significant moments. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 11 is the time. So if the first hour of the programme was about mood or about the depth, if you like, of the damage, about what Boris Johnson somehow represents, what his legacy is, then this part of the programme is about the detail. It's about the last few weeks in which we have watched a general election campaign unfold and the question of what you think the most crucial moments have been when you walk into the ballot box tomorrow, when you walk into the polling booth tomorrow and prepare to put your slip in the ballot box. What memories do you think? What events do you think will be most prominent in your mind? Because the polls haven't moved much. I think historically you would have expected them to close. Would you believe that Theresa May was miles ahead of the Labour Party in 2017? I think largely because of the social care debacle, the lead shrunk to vanishing point, and because of the popularity at the time of Jeremy Corbyn. But the opposite has happened this time around. They haven't moved at all. Opened up a little bit further, perhaps. Sunak seems to have lurched from upset to mistake and back to upset again. But what are the key moments? What do you think the historians will be dedicating a chapter to when they come to chronicle the general election campaign of 2024? And I will throw this into the mix as well. Was my analysis of Starmer correct, do you think? That the success of denying his enemies any weapons at all has left them looking and sounding like the most ridiculous of headless chickens? I've got a clip for you from the day after the election was called, which I missed at the time, but which I think summarises completely the problems that the Tories faced. In fact, you're not, when I play it to you, you're going to think it's parody or satire. I may invite you to guess which former MP it is. But my goodness me, if we'd picked up on it at the time, we'd have played it to death. That idea that, well, I'll play it to you shortly. Let's go to France first. Gary's there in Calais. Gary, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
we've spoken before. Very good too. Great show.
Thank you.
I think the huge big thing with Rishi Sunak was when he left the commemorations for the 80th anniversary D-Day early.
It was mad, that. It was inconceivable, wasn't it?
Well, I was there,
right.
Okay,
yes.
Semi-official, etc. And when he left, it was, everyone couldn't believe it. And I think to compound it even worse was then someone from the Tory advisory must have advised him and said, look, no British servicemen were at commemoration at Omaha Beach.
Right.
Okay. Royal Navy landed a fair few of the American troops on Omaha Beach, the Royal Navy coxswains. Royal Navy ships supporting the shore bombardment at Omaha Beach, including HMS Scourge.
Right.
And the Royal Navy was supporting and landing the Rangers at Point de Hoc. In fact, to the point where the Royal Navy lads went up to support the Rangers fighting at Point de Hoc.
So compounding an appalling decision with apparent ignorance.
Absolutely. And what I know is...
How do you think it happened? I think we did this
ignorance.
At the time. The room where it happens, what was the conversation? Because David Cameron has come out and said, well, he was actively encouraging Sunak to stay. But what would the counter-argument have been? No, we're going to go home early because...
Because someone's turned around and said it's American troops only, it's only an
French.
American thing, and French, let's go.
Yeah. Not troops,
French.
The French leader was there. For me, I think the clincher for me that day was the fact that the German Chancellor was there. And
Absolutely.
the British Prime Minister was not. I mean, you wouldn't. Armando Iannucci wouldn't allow this into the thick of it because it's too implausible. And the best satire has to at least have a ring of plausibility to it, doesn't it?
And I think that set then the mark for the rest of the campaign. And how does Starmer look at it? I'll quote Napoleon: "Don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake."
And more than that, of course, not handing any weapons, which Napoleon didn't say, but I'm sure he'd agree with the wisdom, although he was more of a military campaigner than a politician, the wisdom of just not allowing your enemies to get their hands on any weapons whatsoever. Some people will have clocked... Gary, thank you, and take care, mate. We'll talk again. Some people will have clocked that already, but I wonder if you really felt a penny drop then, because it did for me with the inheritance tax stuff this morning. It's just as if Mother Hubbard has gone to the cupboard to fetch her poor doggy a bone. But when she got there, the cupboard was bare because Keir Starmer had somehow stolen all the weapons that might have been used by Tory politicians or Tory journalists to attack him with. I can't remember that ever happening before, although obviously my memory's coloured by the last 3 or 4 elections. Steve is in Belfast. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think the big change has been when the Lib Dems decided to let Ed Davey have lots of fun, that they actually became visible to the electorate. And therefore, people took notice of them, and it has opened up this blue wall. People do see them as an alternative and take them more seriously because they're not taking themselves seriously.
I have to say that I found the hour we did on Ed Davey's campaign yesterday one of the most uplifting, powerful and enjoyable hours that we have spent together in a very long time. I think Alice was the caller who just crystallised why, for carers in particular or carer-adjacent voters, the combination of profundity when describing his experiences with his own son, and levity when doing everything from bungee jumping to falling off a paddleboard, was a moment of real beauty. And you're absolutely right, that is going to resonate. Whether we realise it or not, we're going to carry that with us, aren't we, I think, moving forward?
We will. And it could change the tone, because they could, will, but could finish second and become the opposition, and therefore that can change the tone of the whole thing. We don't have to suddenly have a politics which is, we mustn't be that, we mustn't dare do stuff. They're daring to do stuff.
I mean, we did it. We changed it. Yeah, I mean, it has, and it's odd, because I kept waiting, and indeed yesterday morning I kind of thought it would settle, waiting for the sense of a lack of statesmanship being a problem, but it has been the most interesting element. If we go for the word interesting or unprecedented element of the whole election campaign, the decision by the Liberal Democrats, who are in with a shout of becoming the official party of opposition tomorrow, to campaign based entirely upon the sort of fun-loving nature of their leader has been unprecedented. I like it. No, I like it a lot. How much of it was a calculation? Do you think this was the plan all along? We didn't dig into this as much yesterday as I intended to. Do you think this was the plan all along? Or do you think they did a couple of these stunts and thought, crikey, this is really working? Someone phoned the bungee jump organisers.
I think they planned it all along. And I think that actually Boris Johnson made it easier for them to do it, because Boris Johnson fostered this thought that politicians are detached from us. Is one rule for them, one rule for us. And if they do the stuff that we do, it makes them more relatable to us, and we're more likely to look at them seriously. So
if this kind of conduct can make a rancid egg look attractive to the electorate, imagine what would happen if a genuinely good egg did it.
Yeah, so it might change the tone. It might.
I like it. No, I like it, and I like it for the list. I like it for the list. It's not a single event, of course, as we detailed yesterday. There's about a dozen single events, but the overall, if you like, element of the electoral campaign, represented by Ed Davies' malarkey. Should we call it shenanigans? Malarkey or shenanigans? It's malarkey, isn't it? No, I want a funny word for this. Malarkey. Malarkeys? Can you have a plural of malarkey? Anyway. Kelly's in Doncaster. Kelly, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I just want to say that one of the most pivotal moments for me, really, was Sunak announcing national service for 18-year-olds.
We're not supposed. No one's supposed to mention that. Have you noticed how that's disappeared from the discourse completely?
Exactly. I mean, coming from a northern town, it's predominantly Labour anyway, so I didn't have the best opinion of the Tories. But I'm 24, so growing up, I was sort of on the cusp of being able to vote in the Brexit referendum, but not being able to. So I've just sat and watched the Tories completely just sort of destabilise the economy and, just sort of provide a massive kick in the teeth for young people. And I think announcing national service was probably the final nail in the coffin for me.
I think you've just reminded me that I should really pick an unhinged headline, shouldn't I? From the election campaign that is the most unhinged headline of the election campaign, and there was one about national service that is definitely up there. Why did you take it so personally, do you think? Because you'd suffered enough and they were turning around and saying, what you lot need is more suffering.
Yes, exactly. I think that's exactly it, and especially because I was a uni student during COVID too, and they provided even more blows to young people, especially university students during that time. I think it's just, I have a sense of, now that I'm old enough to actually do something about it and vote for things and sort of just,
National service. Who was it supposed to appeal to? Who was it?
Exactly. And the thing is, as well, is that I think it was during one of the question times as well, Sunak actually mentioned driving licences and finances being a sanction for not doing it. And it's just...
it's like they wrote it on the back of a fag packet and then lost the fag packet, Kelly.
Exactly. It just seemed like he was just pulling it out of thin air.
I don't know, driving licences, finances.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a pivotal moment for you. But, of course, the clear, and you remind us of this, the fact that it hasn't been mentioned since, effectively, is another indicator of what a misstep it was. That was the big thing. That was the big game-changing announcement. We're going to bring back some form of national service. Now, it's almost as if they're channeling Basil Fawlty. Don't mention the national service. I did, but I think I got away with it. It's extraordinary that one of the biggest policy offers they came up with has been sort of put into purdah ever since. Kelly, thank you. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
This is good. This is from Milo in Marlow. Labour's campaign. It's because Starmer has spent his whole life preparing cases for the defence and prosecution, where it's more important not to lose in the first instance and then go on to win. I love this phrase. I haven't heard it before. To finish first you have to finish. That's great, isn't it? And that not this hour. We may do this specifically in the next hour, but the Labour campaign is not yet featuring in this roundup of key moments in the last few weeks, the last 6 weeks or so. Extraordinary, really. And I've got a wonderful clip for you of, I don't know whether he's standing again, actually. I think he probably is. Of what might be the stupidest contribution to the entire general election campaign that I have come across. And it's from the first day of it. It's from the day after Rishi Sunak announced the general election, a contribution from one of his MPs at the time, which is of such spectacular stupidity that you will think I have invented it. 11:34 is the time. Jenny is in Fairlock. Jenny, what is it for you?
About your point about Keir Starmer disarming the Tories.
Yes, that's the word. That's the word I spent 20 minutes looking for, isn't it? Disarming.
Sorry, I'm really nervous. I'm a first-time caller.
Oh, it's only me. Don't worry.
I just the other side to that, to play devil's advocate, is could Labour now be perceived as being no different to the Tories? Like a lot of the callers that I've heard are saying they're not actually going to vote Tory or Labour, or they're going to spoil their ballot.
You haven't heard people saying that on this show.
Okay.
We're generally a little bit more politically engaged than that, but they certainly exist, these people, and when you're struggling to get phone lines to ring on your radio show, I'm sure that they get on air, but I wouldn't read too much into it, Jenny.
I mean, I really hope so.
No.
It just worries me that it may cause a lot of the sort of more left-wing Labour supporters to switch to other parties like the Green parties, because I think a lot of people want something to be done about the sort of
that's the downside, isn't it? That is the downside of denying your opponents any weapons. You kind of have to keep your own hands in your pockets in a way. But these debates are not often about substantive policy changes. That's why I think, oddly, and I will add this to the list, despite my own theory that Labour weren't going to feature on this, the school fees thing has really resonated in precisely the space you describe. It's not a particularly big deal. It's not going to have a negative effect on many people, but it speaks to equality and redistribution of wealth.
Yeah, that definitely is a standout policy. I agree.
And it might be the only one off the top of our heads that we can think of. Great British Energy.
Exactly.
Great British Energy. We kind of have a rough idea what it means. Not being the Tories is probably the biggest selling point that they have, which is why concerns that there won't be that much difference between them in policy terms are real. The concerns exist, but the detail when you dig into it is pretty skimpy. Not least because the caution that they've displayed to get to this point is contingent upon offering something different when they get into power. But as a couple of you are pointing out to me on Twitter, most persuasively, probably no hostages. You get into power, and in this kind of country, an election went up against an incompetent, unpopular government and a hostile media. That is the approach you take. But if he is not bolder and more principled in government, then the problems will follow fairly quickly. It is 11:36. Ben is in Clacton. Ben, what would you like to say?
Well, the main thing I was concerned with, my wife was ill for most of her married life, and the services that were available were good at that time, years ago, and they deteriorated over time. And the latest, by when Rishi Sunak was asked how he would fund the tax cuts that he intended to have if he won the election, was to fund them out of cuts to welfare.
Yes,
which would embed people's. I mean, people are ill, are already struggling with life, and to say we're going to stick it to them a bit more.
It was as if they cared only for the choir in church, not the entire congregation. That old figure of speech about preaching to the choir. They're friends in the media. They themselves, they want tax cuts. They think that welfare the myth of an overgenerous welfare state has not landed with them, and they turned around and said, yes, we'll cut taxes and we'll cut taxes and cut welfare. You're right.
Yes.
I mean, it was a moment of real ugliness, I think.
Yes, I mean, also, the majority of the public now don't want tax cuts. What they want, and tax is still
the highest it's ever been, highest in living memory, and they're accusing the other lot of preparing to cut it. Did you see that part? Are you about to tell me about the research they did, the polling they did into this, into what households would want in terms of public services and taxation?
Yes, well, the public services and taxation, people want a hospital appointment. They want their family to have a hospital appointment. They want their grandchildren and children to be able to use the public services that are available. It's very worrying and causes more illness and costs more money. That's the other problem.
There must be a German word for that, saving a few quid in the short term but costing a fortune in the long term. I'd read you something that you're going to find really interesting, Ben. And thank you for reminding me of this, because I don't think we mentioned this research at the time. It came out a couple of days ago. The majority, so this is research into that precisely that relationship, commissioned by the Financial Fairness Trust. About 5,600 households were asked what policies the next government should prioritise. The majority, that's 56%, supported increased spending on public services, even if it meant tax rises, and this is the crucial bit, for households like theirs. So this is people comfortable paying more tax if there is a measurable improvement in public services. 56%. And then you get the quarter. You get 24% who said taxes should be reduced for households like theirs, even if it meant less spending on public services. So that's who Sunak is appealing to. And according to this research, that's 24% of the electorate, while he is categorically turning his back on 56% of the electorate. You do not need to be Carol Vorderman to realise that that's not good maths.
Well, there was the other speech when he was actually campaigning against Liz Truss, when he was boasting about moving money away from deprived areas and giving it to more comfortable off areas.
He was in Tunbridge Wells when he gave that speech, actually.
Yes.
Wasn't he standing in the sort of Garden of England, telling people what I've done is take money away from deprived areas and move it to places like this?
Yes, and that's the one reason they should be turfed out, because that's cruel and nasty. And Theresa May's quote about the nasty party is doubled since then.
Yeah.
And bringing, I'm quite pleased they brought the ex-Prime Minister back, because he reminds people of the lies, the corruption and everything else involved.
Of what went before, the David Cameron, who I cannot think of now without hearing the voice of Danny Dyer in the back of my mind and saying a word that I cannot repeat on the radio, regardless of whether or not we're in political purdah or not. Ben, thank you. I mean, that is... Actually, I'm going to play you that clip. Have you got the... I'll double check, actually, because this to me, and I only stumbled across it yesterday, even though it comes from the day after the day after the election was called. You really want a distillation from the lips of one Tory MP about almost everything that we've been discussing today. This would probably be it.
In power for a long time, and I recognise people feel like it's time for change. Actually, we represent the change that's needed. Labour represent more of the same. They might have different faces, but they would be the ones carrying on the failed British state that has caused so many problems for our country.
True or false? Is that a real MP saying, we've been in charge for 14 years, but if you vote for the other lot, then everything will stay the same? We are the party of change, the party that have been... We are responsible for the failed state, and that's why you should vote for it. Have a listen again, just to be sure I'm not exaggerating.
In power for a long time, and I recognise people feel like it's time for change. Actually, we represent the change that's needed. Labour represent more of the same. They might have different faces, but they would be the ones carrying on the failed British state that has caused so many problems for our country.
I mean, what, Tim Nicebert, Tim? I mean, where do you even begin with this character? Danny Kruger, his name is. I think Danny is short for Dunning. How do you even begin to frame the thought that I'm going to go on television describe the state over which my party has governed for 14 years as failed, and then claim that the opposition are the ones that will carry on the same course, while the bloke who has been Prime Minister for the last couple of years and was Chancellor before that, as according to my own analysis, as Dunning-Kruger, according to my own analysis, the state has failed, so vote for us, because we failed it. I don't like superlatives. As I explained to you at the top of the show today, every time I think we've reached rock bottom, up pops the Daily Telegraph to somehow scrape whatever it is that lurks beneath the very bottom of the barrel. But no, that's got to be the stupidest contribution of the election campaign. Shall we open up a competition on this one? Has anybody during this election campaign said anything stupider than this?
In power for a long time, and I recognise people feel like it's time for change. Actually, we represent the change that's needed. Labour represent more of the same. They might have different faces, but they would be the ones carrying on the failed British state that has caused so many problems for our country.
Do you think he high-fived himself in the mirror after that interview? What I did, right? I said, states failed, right? Yeah. Labour are the ones that will carry on destroying the country that has been destroyed, by us. It's coming up to 11:45. A few of you are telling me off for not delivering on a hook and tease. This is an ugly story. If you have a child, or just a loved one, or if you yourself are on the autistic spectrum, this is probably quite triggering. This is a hideous intervention by a candidate who inevitably comes, well, perhaps inevitably comes from a Reform UK Limited candidate, and it is a Reform UK Limited candidate who has described autistic people, and this is where I'm putting out a trigger alert, because this is just gross. He's described them as vegetables. This was mocking someone on social media because they had self-described learning difficulties. I mean, what do you even say? I can understand that you have learning difficulties. Many of us reasoned humans would have a better perspective on this. I feel for you, my friend. Keep plugging away, or just keep favouring your own kind, vegetables. This is a man called Darren Ingrui. It's a bit foreign looking, that name. INGROUILLE, who remains the candidate. And I think they've dropped 7 already. They had to disown Raymond Saint, a candidate in Basingstoke, because he'd been a member of the British National Party. A full list of candidates in Basingstoke and in Chelmsford, where this man who has described autistic people as vegetables is the Reform UK Limited candidate. A full list of candidates is available at lbc.co.uk. And I've done a bit of not naming, Stevie. You picked me up on this quite rightly. Because if I name them, I have to then list, or I have to say that bit about candidates. But to be honest with you, I think probably that was a miscalculation on my part. So I should tell you that Danny Kruger, that bloke we were listening to a moment ago, he's the Conservative candidate for East Wiltshire. And a full list of all the candidates in East Wiltshire is available on our website, lbc.co.uk/candidates. The Reform UK Limited, the Nigel Farage fanboy who described autistic people as vegetables, he is running for Reform UK Limited in Chelmsford. And a full list of candidates in Chelmsford is available at lbc.co.uk/candidates. And, of course, the news yesterday as well was that the second Reform UK Limited candidate to quit the party hours before a general election, alleging that many of her colleagues, her fellow parliamentary hopefuls, were, and I quote, racist, misogynistic and bigoted, which means I should probably apologise for possibly having given the impression in the past that none of these people ever tell the truth.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 minutes to 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are looking at I suppose the key moments, or the key elements is a good word, because it doesn't have to be an individual event. It could be like Ed Davey's entire campaign, it could be something rather bigger than an individual event. But the defining elements of these election campaigns, you'll be unsurprised to learn, I'm far too unprofessional to have actually made a list. But off the top of my head, we've got the Ed Davey frolics, capers, japes. Japes is the word we want. There we go. We got there in the end. Ed Davey's japes. It sounds like a Viz cartoon strip, doesn't it? Ed Davey's japes. It probably already is, actually. We've got the D-Day moment, which I felt that Gary and Calais nailed down in spectacular fashion. The question we asked the morning after was, what the heck happened in the room where it happened for Hamilton fans? It's one of the best songs in Hamilton. What the room where it happened? What happened? How did that go? They thought, and I think he's right. We joked at the time. No, a caller said at the time, I think it's because it was a bit Brexity. He didn't want to be photographed with the French and German leaders. Of course, the President of the United States of America was there as well. And Britain was represented by David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary. 3 world leaders and a kind of joke of a Foreign Secretary who's only got the job after the current Prime Minister elevated him into the House of Lords. Extraordinary. And yet they would have had that conversation. And someone would have persuaded Rishi Sunak that the correct thing to do was to go home early. And his defence was, well, that's what we'd arranged. And then it did emerge in reports from people with sources close to the event. It did emerge that had been the calculation. That was the sort of ceremony for everybody. So we don't need to go to that because we've already been to the one for the British troops. But as Gary explained to us earlier, that demonstrated a complete ignorance of the events of D-Day, the kind of anatomy, if you like, of D-Day. So that would go on the list. The tax-cutting welfare being a point at which you wonder what planet these people inhabit. Who looks at the United Kingdom today and thinks welfare is too generous? It's been a rallying point for them since Duncan Smith was at work and pensions, that they've been responsible for making it measurably less generous. That's why we've got food banks. It's why we've got warm banks. It's why we've got hungry children. It's why we've got teachers bringing food to school and washing clothes for some of their charges because of the success, in quotes, of Tory party policies on welfare. It is extraordinary, but there's room for more. Tom's in Bodmin. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hiya, mate. Thanks for taking the call. Hope you're well. So for me, I think the biggest moment, or the most pivotal moment personally, maybe not historically, was when Nigel Farage threw his cap back into the ring. Reason being is, like him or loathe him, I think he draws a lot of attention.
Well, there's no arguing with that, Tom.
No. So for me, it drew my attention to reform the party. And also, it started a lot of conversations with me and people I know about reform, which, right, fine. But then one night, I was in a pub. Don't tell my wife. I was in a pub, and a fella sat at the bar, and his daughter runs into the pub, greets him, and he picked her up, and he said, "Did you speak to any black people today?"
What?
And my jaw dropped, and the 2 boys I was sat with, jaw dropped, and we were just gobsmacked. And it made me realise that the debate is always, are they racist? Are they not racist? Is it racist to support their views? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then I really had a penny drop moment where you might not think you're racist or they're racist, but they're the people you're jumping into bed with if you do back that party.
So this bloke in the pub was speaking up for Farage, was he, before this incident? You know that he's on the same team?
For sure, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right, sorry, I just missed that bit of the story.
Yeah, no, I didn't explain that well enough.
That's all right.
But yeah, it's a penny drop moment where, yeah, like I said, they're the people you're going to be jumping into bed with.
I think you probably have to witness it like that, because you could have been listening to me for years trying to describe why I feel that he represents the very, very worst of us. But until you actually have it right in front of you like that, maybe the penny doesn't drop properly.
Well, not only just that, I've heard racial slurs and, racist point of views in the past, but it was so much more visceral because he was talking to a 7-year-old.
Good God.
And that's the cycle that is just going to perpetuate, isn't it? It's just
and we have the activist that described Rishi Sunak using the P word.
There we go.
And the senior member of Farage's inner circle who conflated gay people with paedophiles. I mean, the evidence is there, but sometimes you do have to have your face rubbed in it, don't you, to clock it properly.
So many people who wouldn't consider themselves racist, like I don't, may well have looked at the contract of the people, we'll call it, and thought, oh, okay, I agree with that. Maybe I agree with that. But then, I don't know. It was a penny drop moment for me. So.
Well, and it's very honest of you to share it. I don't know what the difference will be. I mean, I think they got 12.6% in 2015 when it was Miliband versus Cameron, and they're looking at about 16% now. So what would they have got if Richard Tice had still been in charge? Probably somewhere between 12.6% and 16%. But you're absolutely right about the levels of attention that he still receives. Thank you, Tom. But Russ is in Bangor in Northern Ireland. Russ, what is it for you? What do you take away? What do you look back on most?
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good, all good.
I've called before. Remember I phoned you about I had said goodbye to my dad over an iPhone as he died of COVID. This is not about that today, but I was going to mention that earlier when you heard all the other people telling you the stories of...
I'd underestimated how much Johnson was a trigger for that kind of memory.
Oh, my God, that was the worst thing they could have done last night, is wheel him out. Anyway, but this actually leads to the next point. Rishi came out when all that had kind of blown over, quote unquote, and came out and said, "Oh, it's going to be different now. This is decency. I'm going to put whatever he said. I don't know. It doesn't really register.
Integrity, professionalism, and accountability."
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I knew you'd be on it.
I should get out more.
I tell you what, there's a book in this section, isn't there?
Behave.
And I'm not your agent, but please write it. I've read all the others. But when Sunak went on telly and lied 12 times to the British public, I realised again, and you've said it before, I think you talked about it during the D-Day conversations on your show. We all thought he was a decent guy. He was at least
managerial, therefore kind of data-driven rather than dishonest-driven.
Yeah, but then throughout the entire campaign since, perhaps panic, perhaps desperation, perhaps somebody's got their hand up his back, all the above, he's lied. He's not counted the lies of his party that have lied about everything from Keir Starmer going home at 6 o'clock to, you name it, there seems to be one lie a day.
It's the tax thing that you're focusing on first, I think, the £2,000 claim that he lied several times.
He's lied, he's repeated it, he was called out on it by independent bodies, but he still repeated it, and that's when you realise it's the same stuff but a different suit.
I'm not doing this because I have to, because I don't think I do have to, but some of the Labour claims about what's going to happen to Tory mortgages, they've been hauled over the coals for that by independent analysts as well.
But I think we'd agree that the Conservatives had a pathologically liar campaign. It's almost on a daily basis.
Yeah. It has been extraordinary. I wonder whether you lead us back to the first hour of the programme and that this actually is part of the Boris Johnson legacy. So the idea that, well, you've got to at least tell something like the truth if you're campaigning in the public space, that has still not returned to the Tory party mentality, the Tory party psyche, has it?
Can I tell you that I haven't felt this excited since I was about 7 waiting for Father Christmas to come than I do for tomorrow. I'm serious.
Well, it ain't over till it's over. But you're not the first person to tell me that today.
I'm serious. I'm 58, and I never thought I'd get the excitement of Father Christmas coming down the chimney again.
58. So you were 7 in 1966.
No, I was born in 66.
Oh, yeah, I'm just doing it for my own. No, I'm doing the maths from 1972 when I was born. So I just add, 1970, I was 6 in 1978.
This could have been a Carol Warderman moment and you would have been okay.
When were you 6? Do the sum yourself. What year were you? 1972, the year I was born. That's why I got confused. Yeah. Oh, I don't know then. I'm trying to think what because someone told me earlier I haven't been this excited since I thought I was going to get an Action Man helicopter for Christmas.
I'm
Girls' World I got as well. I got another one from someone saying I haven't been this excited since I was waiting to get my Girls' World off Father Christmas.
I'm serious. I'm absolutely...
But what would you have been hoping for in 1972? What was at the top of the child's wish list in 1972? Can you remember? A bicycle?
It's Evel Knievel. Do you remember you used to wind him up and off he went?
Evel Knievel. Could be your Evel Knievel moment tomorrow then, Ross.
I never got one. So this is my Evel Knievel moment.
There's a phone in the olden days when we used to do slightly mad phone-ins on the programme. You'd do a phone-in about the Christmas present you never got. The one that you're still bitter about. You still haven't forgiven Santa Claus for the fact that he never turned up with your Evel Knievel. Ross, thank you. Lovely call. And again, I'm sorry for your loss. I got that. I didn't get it wrong. I'm not doing any self-flagellation here. But I misunderestimated? Is that one of the words that George W. Bush made up? I underestimated how triggering Boris Johnson is for people who still feel fury at the circumstances in which they had to say goodbye to loved ones during COVID. And that would not have happened had it not been for the revelations about the parties. It was not the policies necessarily it's clearly not the policies people have a problem with. It's the parties, isn't it?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12, our last hour talking about politics before we have a new government. Regardless of who leads it, it is technically a new government. I haven't got a topic. What should we do? Play some music? Do you know what I would like to listen to a bit more is Smear Keir, the Smear Keir jingle, because that conversation that we touched on in the last hour is actually, I hadn't realised this. There's a reason why you haven't heard this very often, because they couldn't. They tried and they failed. The constant attempts. I mean, we should probably have pulled it out of the cupboard a little bit more on the Friday night dinners, but what else was there? That's how effective the mission to disarm the client media in particular, because they're the ones who deploy the real viciousness when it comes to attacking Labour politicians. But also the Tory politicians themselves haven't really been able to hit him with everything. Should we make a list of the attempts? Should we do an hour of Smear Keir? Or would you rather look back over the entire 14 years of Tory rule? The problem with that is a little bit counting your chickens, lads, isn't it? Looking back over the 14 years and saying what are the key moments, what are the significant moments, with absolutely no guarantee that there's not going to be another 5 years of Conservative government stretching ahead of us until almost 2030. I don't know. What do you prefer? Ben wants to talk about potholes, but I don't think he is being entirely serious. I haven't got any unhinged headlines today, so we can't do that, and it wouldn't make an hour anyway. I have got, we should have kept a list of unhinged headlines, We should have been a bit more professional about this, and then we could actually have a little vote on what was the winner, what was the most unhinged headline of the election campaign. Next election, We'll get around to it. Put it on your to-do list. What I think my favourite unhinged headline was probably the one that... hang on, we have got a list. Is that all of them? Have we been keeping that up to date? No, it isn't, is it? You'd started it. No, don't interrupt me when I'm interrupting you. Yeah. You started it, didn't you? Because I said, can we make sure we do this? And then you just stopped halfway through, didn't you? Let's see the most recent date there, please. Scroll down. 22nd of 8. Yeah, so it stops on the 14th of May. What's the date today? It's the 3rd of July. So there you go. This is a sort of editorial meeting unfolding live on air. So when I made it clear how keen I was to have a proper record of unhinged headlines, I obviously succeeded in conveying how seriously I took this to my crack team of operatives. And so they began a list on the 18th of April. Scroll down again. And it ended on the 14th of May. And it doesn't even include my favourite one, which was probably the one about why young people should do national service in order to say thank you for furlough, which was published in the Daily Telegraph without anybody realising, apparently, that the young people were the ones that paid the highest price during lockdown in order to protect their older relatives. Sort of young people not being able to go to school, having to study in their bedrooms in order to keep their grandparents alive. As someone who had a strange name, I think it may have been Breton something, that was probably the most unhinged headline. I don't think Jim is taking this terribly serious either. He says, why not do an hour on Brexit benefits? There has been one rather big benefit of Brexit. I think we can all agree. But it's very personal, and I don't think it would be appropriate to remind you of how good it's been for business on my side of the microphone. I mean, the Smear Keir stuff's pretty good. But I think we're going to look at the last 14 years. Given that we've got absolutely no idea what lies ahead, work is going to be an interesting business for me. I think, at least to start with, if the polls deliver, if we see a result anything like suggested by the polls, then I will be fascinated to see what happens to the Tory party. The Tory party is going to be considerably more interesting than the Labour Party for the first few months. Sunak probably should stay on, like Michael Howard did, and ensure a nice handover. But the problem is you've already got people agitating to replace him who are making no secret of the fact that they hate him. Suella Braverman, who's managed to get sacked by almost everybody that's ever employed her, politically speaking, going in today on an attack for the Daily Telegraph, inevitably, and attacking her colleagues already. So that's going to be very interesting. Yeah, that was it. Hamish Breton Gordon. Thank you, Connor. We'll dig that one out and give that a little prize for being probably the most unhinged head. So I don't think you can include the Alistair Heath headlines about Armageddon and apocalypses and all that kind of thing. But we'll have a look at that. But here's what we're going to do. We've been together for 14 years. We've been together for 20 years now, you and me. I don't know whether you've kept count. I don't know whether you've been here for the duration. But we have together chronicled 14 years of Conservative government, the first 5 of which, of course, were technically coalition. We have laughed together. We have cried together. We have counted them in. And unless something extraordinary happens in the next 24 hours or so, less now, we are probably poised to count them out. And therefore, I think it might be quite a nice moment, actually, to reflect upon what we consider to be the biggest events, moments, movements of the last 14 years. So what would it be for you? We've done the last 5 years, and we've done the last 6 weeks in the context of the election campaign. And I've written a book, of course, about how they broke Britain, which goes back much further than the last 14 years, but pretty much kicks in 2010 when Cameron came into power and kicks on in 2016 when that ludicrous referendum was called. But what is it for you? At 11 minutes after 12, what are the biggest political moments of the last 14 years? The most defining political moments? And listen, if you challenge the analysis that Britain is broken, you do so from a very interesting perspective, because that clip I played you earlier of Danny Dunning-Kruger, or Danny Kruger, describing the country as a failed state, as a Tory politician, and then explaining that's why you should vote Tory. That is evidence, and you can't take one person as a guidance, but that is evidence of just how bonkers everything has become. There are several milestones on the road to where we are now. Several milestones on the road to where we are now. Some of them very obviously enormous milestones. Some of them less obviously enormous. And they don't have to be enormous to be milestones. They just have to have a number on them. You can go a little bit rogue if you want. You can pick up things that are not immediately obvious, or you can, at least in the first instance, before somebody else does it, you can go for the absolute classics, the greatest hits. You can point out the things that Brexit, I suppose, most obviously. But look back over the last 14 years that we have spent together, not all of them, I grant you, and tell me what you think are the most significant political moments. The things, I loved that call from Bodmin earlier from Tom, where he used one of my favourite phrases, the penny drop moment, where the things that have happened in the last 14 years that have changed the way you think about politics. Things that have unfolded, that have either robbed you of hope and enthusiasm or delivered it to you. When you look back on the period of UK history between 2010 and 2014, what do you think historians of the future will consider to have been the most interesting elements, moments, events? Not the most important. Okay, we've done plenty of that. But just the most interesting things that have happened politically since 2010. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And you'll have forgotten some stuff. Here's a brilliant example. I'm nicking this, and it's a shame because you could have phoned in with this. But here is an incredible thing. This is when they were not long after Theresa May became Prime Minister. She gave a speech at the Tory party conference in October of 2016, where she said that after Brexit, Britain would accept no European laws, would take control of its own immigration policy, would have its own trade deal with the EU, and would be outside the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Several of those things, many Leave campaigners had made clear they didn't believe would happen. But when Theresa May went all in on it, Philip Hammond, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, no less, the second most important member of that government, has subsequently said this: I was absolutely horrified by what I was hearing. This is in an interview for the Brexit Witness Archive. I know I overused the phrase client media, but there's a reason why you haven't heard of this before. This is Philip Hammond. All I remember thinking was, there will be a television camera that will be on your face. If you move a muscle, it will be the story on the front page of every newspaper tomorrow. I just remember focusing my entire energy on maintaining a rictus half smile, and then I got out of the room without speaking to any journalists. I was completely and utterly horrified by what I felt was almost a coup. Hammond then flew straight to Washington for the IMF conference, and he recalled, when I arrived in Washington, it was to discover that the pound was in free fall. I then had to get out on the TV in Washington to try to reinterpret the Prime Minister's speech for the markets in a way that would try to stop the slide in sterling. It was a disaster on all fronts, a total unmitigated disaster that scarred her prime ministership. But I think she only realised later how badly that had constrained her ability to deliver any kind of practical Brexit at all. She kind of took all of her negotiating positions off the table. And we probably still don't fully appreciate that because we still rely upon Brexit cheerleaders to bring us much of our news. So she tacked so sharply towards a hard Brexit, but she did so without consulting her cabinet. That was a crucial moment, and that was in 2016. That was the Tory party conference in 2016. And that is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It doesn't have to be a massive moment. It doesn't have to have been a widely reported moment, but it is a moment that for you is emblematic of the best part of a decade and a half. I'm told that my mate Jonathan Pye, or Tom as I know him, has done an absolutely bang-up job of summing up the last 14 years, but I am almost 100% certain that I will be unable to play that to you, given the proliferation of profanity with which Jonathan Pye normally elects to articulate himself. I don't know, we may check, but I'm more interested in what you think at this point in proceedings, and the things you would take from the last 14 years as having been the biggest. Well, no. The most interesting and or significant. All right, hit the numbers now. You will get through. The time is 12:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. Do you know what is the name that you are most surprised not to hear more of? When you think of the last 5 years, we go back to 2019. No, think of the last 8 years. A name that we probably expected to be peppering our time together, like punctuation marks, but who we rarely even acknowledge the existence of anymore. Who would it be? Who'd be at the top? That's a little pop quiz for you. You can text me your answer to that. But I'm looking at what you take from the last 14 years and consider most interesting or memorable or even perhaps important. Let's start with Jules in Upton upon Severn. Jules, what's it going to be?
Right, so I can distill it down to, for me, to one little sequence that lasted about, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was when Liz Truss gave that press conference where she was sort of staring around the room with this vacant expression on her face, trying to find journalists, if you remember, during the Q&A. After what can you call it? I mean, it was a catastrophe, wasn't it, on all fronts. And for me, that was a moment that kind of summed up
the fact that here they were all washed up, clinging on by their fingernails. They'd run out of time, out of people, out of talent.
I don't remember this one.
Ideas.
This was so after the markets had responded to the fiscal event.
That's right, and she had to come up and give that press conference, and she got.
But she wasn't resigning. She wasn't resigning, was she? She was sort of.
No. It was in the in that sort of conference room thing that they put into number 10.
Yeah.
And she was just staring around, going,
that's right,
Robert Peston or whatever.
Oh God, yeah. I mean,
it was to me. It was a kind of a. It was like if you could freeze that moment in aspic. It would sit there forever as the moment when the penny dropped. I think the penny dropped for a lot of people probably back then. That. How much more of this can this country endure now?
The machine was still quite ruthless, though. You know, that most successful, it's often said, electoral machine in history, that the traditional Conservative Party, they chewed her up, they spat her out, and they started pretending that none of it had ever happened, up to and including newspaper editorials being written by people who describe it as the best Tory budget of their lifetime, suddenly pretending that it was all an aberration and it had nothing to do with them. So it didn't work, did it, that time? So that's why it's so significant.
But they did that all along, didn't they? Every time there was a new iteration, even with Sunak now, it's always, we know it's all terrible, it's completely awful, but I'm here now and I'm going to fix it.
Which is why that clip, did you hear that clip earlier from Danny Kruger saying that the country's failed, therefore you must vote for us?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I'm really sorry I crashed the car, but don't worry, because I've got like some spanners and a
Just
and a
incredible.
socket set.
Don't vote for the other lot, because they're going to carry on with the mess that we've been inflicting upon you for the last 14 years.
It's like teacup politics. It's like if you were to drive your car into a wall and say, smash it to pieces, look at it and go, but a teacup.
Do you know, I don't talk about Truss very much, and she is obviously the shortest chapter in my latest book, but you're right. I mean, she represents something, probably, in fact, Sunak's curse was to be the kind of holding pattern after Truss had broken it.
Yeah, and, will he go down as the last one in a generation? I think absolutely.
This is Friday morning's phone-in. Don't jump in early. This is going to be Friday morning's phone-in.
Okay. Look, I think, it's 3 hours of mystery hour tomorrow.
Yeah, something like that. We may talk about
I think
potholes.
we all need that, James, you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. That's what the world needs. Doesn't work. We've tried it before. There's a reason why it's mystery hour. Jules, lovely stuff. Anne's in Sevenoaks. Anne, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I've been listening to the debate, and I think that whilst I can't defend the Tories in their entirety, there's a lot of mistakes, and I agree the country is very, very broken. I do think that Sunak is the safer pair of hands when it comes to the economy.
Safer than who?
Safer than Labour. And the reason I'm saying that is that the Labour government, last time they were in power, when Cameron took over, left a note on the desk to say there was no more money in the coffers. They bankrupted the country.
No. You've forgotten the 2008 global financial crisis.
No, I haven't.
No, you have.
No, I haven't.
No,
there were pension rates.
You clearly have.
Trust me. Please don't put words in my mouth, because
I didn't. I was telling you the words you hadn't said.
I went through and experienced very heavily the financial crisis in 2008. But nonetheless, Labour were irresponsible in the spending, having raided pensions and everything else. And that balance has got to be heard on this conversation, whether you like it or not. You can say all you like, and when you say that Brexit was a ridiculous situation, well, there's 51% of the country voted for it. We're not all ridiculous. We're quite intelligent, quite informed.
What's the best bit of it?
What's the best bit of it?
Yeah, what's the biggest benefit?
I don't think that the full benefit has been executed by the Tories.
No, but the bits that have been executed, what's your favourite?
Because we've got independence.
No, I mean as in something that we can see and something we can see and measure. So which law? Which is your favourite?
Various laws.
Just name one.
No, I'm not going to fall into that. I'm just saying.
Well, you can't come on the radio and say there's loads of great laws, and then I say, could you tell me one of them? You have to tell me one of them, Anne.
No, I don't.
Well, obviously you don't. It's not the law.
No, the law.
Well, except possibly it is the law. So what do you like most? What do you like?
However, what hasn't happened by the Tories,
with respect, that's just ignorance.
No, it's not ignorance.
Well, give me an example then.
Give
me an example.
What I'm going on to say is what the Tories have failed to do
Can I
is
have
to
one
execute
example?
Brexit. No, I don't need to give you an example.
You do, otherwise
Why
everyone's
don't you
going to
just
think you're
listen
very
to the rest of
silly.
the conversation?
No,
Well, I
you
think
have
you're
to give me
silly
one
because
example.
The conversation is really, really biased in
It's
favour
not biased. It's
of
biased in favour of
anti-Tory.
evidence and examples.
And they're all as bad as each
So
other.
what's your
actually, when we
example?
come to it.
What's your example?
I've given you the example.
You haven't. You just used words like control with no proof. So what's your proof that we have more control? Go on then.
I've got proof.
I'll
Go look it
go on
up.
then.
Don't Google it.
No, you can't say I've got proof.
You
can't say I've got proof.
At the end of the day,
go and Google it.
You have got
So give me some
load
proof.
of parties here that are all as bad as each other.
Yes,
The
except
Tories have
they're not
covered
all as bad as each other, because people on the other side of this argument, if we can use that word very, very loosely, they will point at things that have happened. For example, having to choose the 12 people that could attend the funeral of your 16-year-old son. That is not something that makes Labour the same as the Conservatives. But we're talking about Brexit. We're talking... let me speak, please. And then you go back to that note as well in the... in the Treasury, which actually nudged back to something that Reggie Maudling did when he was the Conservative Chancellor and left a very similar message. There's no money left, old Pip, or something like that for his Labour
that's a long
success.
time ago. But
well, you're talking about 14 years ago, so your point is ridiculous.
No, it's not. It's a big event that has led to, along with COVID, and
why
the
do
money
you
that
think?
was paid out.
Why do you think that every economy in the world, arguably, certainly in the free world, followed the advice of Alistair Darling and and Gordon Brown when it came to dealing with the global financial crisis and the policy of quantitative easing? When Gordon Brown went to France, even though he hadn't actually been invited, and persuaded, I think, Sarkozy to let him speak to all the EU leaders or the European Eurozone leaders, and Alistair Darling flew to Washington to speak to America, why do you think they all took the advice of the two Labour politicians? Anne?
Sorry, say that again.
Why do you think every government in the world, practically, followed the advice of Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling when it came to emerging from the global financial crisis of 2008?
You tell me.
Because they were brilliant.
Really?
Well, no, that's my answer. It's your turn. It's your turn now.
Well, my turn is to say they weren't that brilliant because all they were doing was storing up a load of problems that got taken over in 2010.
No,
now,
but those are just words. They don't actually mean anything. They were solving.
They're not words.
No, well, they are words, Anne. We can at least agree that they're words that you said.
But it's 2010. There's no money in the budget.
No, the 2010 is a consequence of the global financial crisis of 2008, and the direction of traffic at the time was positive. Alistair Darling was improving a situation that the Tories then came in and tried to address with austerity. And the fact that you have to cling to something as ridiculous as a 40...
Not clinging to it.
Well, hang on, you don't know what I've said yet. How can you say it's not ridiculous?
Go on then, finish it.
You have to cling to something as ridiculous as a 14-year-old private joke between at least one person of whom didn't think it would ever be made public is evidence that you haven't really got anything substantive to say. Well, except that's not fair. Except, of course, I've got loads of examples, but I can't tell you what they are. You're going to have to go and Google it yourself.
No, I think there's some manipulation of what I've said, and I think 14 years...
Feel free to remind me what the benefits are.
It shouldn't be a joke to anybody.
What are the benefits of Brexit? What are the benefits?
It's public money, and it should be important to everybody listening and everybody not listening. It's public money, and there was none left. So spending money that wasn't there. You can't run a business that way.
Is the debt bigger or smaller today than it was then?
Bigger.
So whose fault is that then?
COVID.
Oh, I see. Right. So the global financial crisis had nothing to do with the state of the economy when Labour lost in 2010, but the failure of... So what was the figure before COVID? What was the debt before COVID, Anne?
You tell me.
No, you tell me, because you're the one that's insisting that Rishi Sunak is a safer pair of hands than the Labour Party. So you tell me.
The speak for themselves. Inflation has come down, hasn't it?
Yes, and it also went up. So your point is what?
It did go up, and the reason it went up was in part linked to COVID and in part linked to the legacy issues, of which, yes, the Tories are part of it.
Give me your favourite legacy issue. What's your favourite legacy issue, Anne?
Well, my favourite legacy issue is what I've just said, which is that they were bankrupt. But I don't think we're going to get anywhere, so we'll agree to disagree.
No,
But
we
thanks for
won't.
your
I
time.
never agree to disagree with people who haven't got any evidence to support their position. So what I suspect you're going to do now is just hang up. I'm like Nostradamus. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I can't do this. I'm trying to pick a favourite unhinged headline while simultaneously dealing with unhinged callers. Honestly, people have no idea of the weight of my burdens. 2 texts came in the course of the last 2 minutes saying, James, please cut her off. And then one said, James, please keep her on. In the end, I suppose I kept both of you happy. Such is my mission in life. Back to the last 14 years and evidence-based, example-driven answers to the question of what is most memorable. What are you going to take away, or which elements of the last, politically speaking, have proved the most interesting? Paul's in New Southgate. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon now. Good afternoon to you. Yeah, I've got two totally diametrically opposite things about the Tory government. I will say they absolutely saved my bacon. We have a small company, 7 hard-working people, and during COVID, we got the bounce-back loan, we got the furlough, we survived, we opened up again. Business is absolutely booming because I sell beds, and the good people of Essex had been making good use of their beds during COVID, so needed new mattresses.
Do you think, so COVID was good for the bed business, we think?
COVID was very good for the bed business, and then along come Liz Truss and all this nastiness and all this horribleness, and now my good, loyal customers of 44 years can't afford to come out and buy simple products, replace a mattress, a couple of £100. No, that's the extra on their bill for a couple of months.
Cost of living.
And
So it is precisely one of those things that you will postpone the renewal of because you've got to pay for stuff that is more urgent.
So it's trashed my business. We're clinging on. I'm borrowing a few quid to keep us going because, I've got good people working for me and I've got loyal customers.
Yeah, okay. And you do track that back to the impact of Liz Truss's fiscal event on everybody's mortgages and cost of living and the rest of it.
Absolutely. And I can't even say that we're doing anything wrong because our suppliers who also supply the internet, the big stores and everyone else, their deliveries have gone from 3 weeks to 6 or 7 days. So that proves that
because they're not busy.
Yeah, exactly. No one's taking the business off me. There just isn't the business
People
around.
are just not buying the beds. It'll come back round again, won't it? But when?
Well, that's it. I hope a change of government, and I've never voted Labour in my life, but I will be tomorrow. And I'm hoping the change of government, at least people have a bit of confidence. Maybe they'll pull out their credit cards.
And so I like the fact you've reminded us of the I mean, I have to now remind everybody that 3 or so million people didn't get the help that you described during COVID. A sort of combination of self-employment and certain business arrangements left some people dangling in the most unfair of fashions. But for a huge number of business people, Sunak got that right. And for you, Liz Truss undid all the good that Sunak did and then some.
Exactly.
What's the name of the business, Paul, in case anyone is looking for a new bed in the New Southgate area? No, I mean it, mate. If I can throw a few customers your way, my day will not have been wasted.
We're in Essex and we're called City Beds.
There you go. City Beds.
Yeah, with a C.
12:35 is the time. Good luck, Paul. Take care, mate. And if you're looking for anything in the Essex area, bed-related, then tell Paul I sent you. Dee's in Balcombe in West Sussex. Dee, what would you like to say?
Hiya. It's the defining moment for me was when, in 2016, when Cameron resigned and he just did that little weird whistle.
Yeah, that was weird.
And it was like, when you were a child and you're being picked on, you're being bullied, and you just smirk because you don't want to show that you're frightened or you're scared. It just reminded me of that. And it was also like a little harbinger of doom of everything that was going to come afterwards.
There was a defence mounted that it was his way of alerting the person behind the door that he had finished and he was walking towards the door, and it was his way of signalling that he wanted the door to be opened. But I've never heard anybody do it before or since, which means that that's probably not the truth in retrospect.
I don't think it is the truth. And also, even if you ignore the little weird whistle, you've got the fact that it was so cowardly. to be.
I wonder about that. I mean, what else could he have done, given that Brexit was such a big deal? The idea that
but it was like being a little kid at the back of the class and setting up a load of trouble and then running away.
Except that if he'd stayed, they'd have come for him, wouldn't they? There's no way that. Well, I don't know. It's a big counterfactual, actually, because I think I was thinking about Michael Howard earlier today, which is not something anyone should do really on a regular basis. But he did ensure a safe handover after the annihilation of it'd be 2002, would it? I think, or no, the one after that. He stayed for 6 months and ushered in the era of David Cameron and the era of George Osborne. And I think Rishi Sunak should do the same for the health of the Conservative Party. But I don't know that Cameron could have done after losing Brexit. I think there was so much at stake that was unique to Brexit that he had to flee the scene, didn't he?
No, because I think it's like any situation. If you're in care work, or if you're a teacher, or if you're a lecturer, or anything else, the responsibility is whether it's your reputation or whether it's your responsibility to your class or the people you care for, or in this case, your country. You don't put yourself first. You consider.
So he should have hung around for at least a little bit longer.
Yes, just to consider a proper handover, because that all these people that followed Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Elizabeth Truss, it's all been about the personality and the person rather than the country. I would say, as a caveat to that, I would say out of all of those, probably Theresa May was more ethical. Is that the right word? Or it had more integrity, I think.
Yes, I mean,
but the rest of them,
she is separate from the rest of them, although I have to say that there's a brilliant piece in the London Review of Books this month by Tom Crew called A Carnival of Self-Harm, and she doesn't emerge from that very well, but she didn't merit a chapter in my book, Dee, which I think speaks to the idea that she doesn't hold anything like as much responsibility as some of the others for what has unfolded since 2015. 12:38 is the time. Thank you, Dee. I remember that moment as well, and it was odd. It was odd, and I don't know. I think Dee's probably 52% right on that, and I'm 48. The idea that David Cameron could have hung around for a little bit longer to ensure that the baton was passed more peaceably. But remember that May ended up being unchallenged, didn't she, after the mess of that lead? God, I'd forgotten that. The one where Johnson and Gove were in cahoots, like Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. And then Gove announced that he couldn't possibly in conscience support Boris Johnson's bid to become Prime Minister. And then when a few years later Boris Johnson actually became Prime Minister, Michael Gove took more jobs in his various cabinets than anybody else. Integrity, she said. James is in Chester. James, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. Absolute pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise, mate.
So it's a bit of an obscure one. It's from a good while ago, but I don't know when. And it was when the having a vote in the Commons about nurses' pay, and it got voted down, and the Tory party cheered.
Oh, I don't remember that either. I thought I was good at this. So it's it's not the vote.
It was a good while ago, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. It's not the vote necessarily, because if it was an opposition bill, then they would have introduced it expecting it to be defeated, but cheering.
Yeah, it's just insensitive.
The denial of a pay rise for nurses. There's a few things that get cheered in the House of Commons that make you find that I find almost incomprehensible. I wonder whether it's the atmosphere there. They're cheering a goal as opposed to necessarily cheering the fact that nurses aren't going to get a pay rise. Do you see what I mean? Maybe?
Yeah, 100%, yeah. But you just think, like, if you can't afford it, fine. If you've got other priorities, fine. You don't have to celebrate the idea that people aren't going to get a pay rise, which they wholeheartedly deserve.
So when you've got a politician doing something that might fly in the face of what the rest of us see as natural justice, you want them to do it reluctantly. You want them to say, like Mum telling you she can't afford something when she, it's just, no, we can't afford it. And you go, oh, but you don't want Mum going, no sweets for you. Hey!
Yeah.
And Starmer's done that a bit, hasn't he, with the two-child benefit. Whenever he's asked about it, he says, we would like to have done it, but we've had to make difficult decisions and we have prioritised other things over the abolition of the 2-child limit on benefits. You might hate it, but you could at least sound reluctant and disappointed that you can't do. Yeah, okay. I don't remember the event you described, but it's on the list. They're cheering, and the House of Commons has been a fairly unpleasant place in many ways since 2019, in particular, I would say, when Johnson got in, and of course, I'm going to have my own go now. I'm putting Owen Paterson in there. This is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but I think, you might have thought that sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to lie to the Queen was a significant moment, and you'd be absolutely right. And I know that we did our Johnson retrospective in the first hour, but the Owen Paterson moment was huge in the evolution of British politics over the last 14 years, when a senior politician was found to have breached parliamentary standards. It was unthinkable not that long ago that the response would be anything other than ordering him to take his medicine. If I remember correctly, the suspension he would have got would not have been enough to even trigger a recall. I think there's a threshold for recall, isn't there? I think that if Owen Paterson had just accepted his punishment, he'd probably still be in Parliament now. But he didn't. And they all joined forces. Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Charles Moore, Johnson's old editor at the Daily Telegraph, various grandees from that Daily Telegraph kind of cabal, and various Tories set up in a meeting at the Garrick Club in London. So there were no women present. Set up a meeting, the Save Owen Paterson Society, and they set about trying to set fire to the rule book, and they succeeded because of the size of that majority. And then it was the Daily Mail, would you believe? Under the editorship of Geordie Gregg, who turned out not to be long for that job, almost certainly as a consequence of this. The Daily Mail really bear responsibility for not letting that happen, not letting that through, articulating the outrage of a nation, really, that a government would use parliamentary time to pass a vote designed to let one of their own off the hook. And that's what they had become by then. That's what they'd become. While in the case of some of the people I just listed, still seeing themselves as respectable. And speaking of people who still see themselves as respectable, we haven't mentioned Jacob Rees-Mogg, have we? And he, some footage emerged of him yesterday talking about how he wished he could vote for Donald Trump, or how if he lived in America he'd vote for Donald Trump. So that's an adjudicated rapist and convicted felon that the self-described devout Catholic Jacob Rees-Mogg would be keen to vote for. It must be quite a confession that he engages in. And speaking of Trump, Bannon, you could take the two most senior members of Donald Trump's inner circle. Steve Bannon is now in jail, and Rudy Giuliani was yesterday disbarred in New York from practicing law over his lies about the last American election, 2020 election. And yet, of course, in this country, we've still got politicians praising Donald Trump. Not just Jacob Rees-Mogg, but his colleague on GBBs as well, Nigel Farage. 12:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:47. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I have just reflected briefly on how much we've missed. I mean, some huge stuff. Not just from the last 14 years, even from the last 8. That David Cheney, that conference speech of Theresa May's. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. You've heard me get a frog in my throat on occasion, haven't you? I had one earlier this week, and that dreadful cough that you know it's coming back. But I get to a junction, I have a violent coughing fit or drink some tea, and I'm okay. She was haunted by it for the entire speech. And then a letter fell off the wall behind her, and was that the one when someone got on stage and tried to give her a P45? Am I getting my stories mixed up? Goodness me, once you start, there's absolutely nowhere else you can go, isn't there? Robbie is in Chelmsford. Robbie, back to the catalogue of 14 years. What do you want to add to it?
Good day, James. So for me, it is unmistakably, and it relates to a couple of points. You set me off with this with your initial one at the beginning of the hour.
Yeah.
It's the morning when I stayed up, sad as I am, I always watch all of the elections and votes and things, and I heard David Dimbleby on the telly say, "That's it, we're out," in his unmistakably authoritative, quintessential tone. And I think, as someone who voted Leave, and I've called you on this before, I regret it, conned, etc. I felt a little bit of a sinking feeling inside, but the sliding doors moment, and it was so brilliantly alluded to, the hollow public school confidence mendacity in calling a referendum and losing control of that runaway train. Yeah. It was an advisory referendum, and I've been waking up not every morning, but most mornings ever since, thinking two things. How on earth did this so-called party of power lose total control of that? You think of things like the Patterson scandal, where they were willing to rewrite the rule book for something like that, not something like this. How absurd that an advisory referendum on our relationship turned into a binary yes-no that's going to...
I think it was always destined to be a binary yes-no, even though it was technically advisory. I don't think anyone was ever going to get the idea that they didn't have to react completely to the result. I don't think anyone was ever going to get that to fly. But yeah, the what's the word we want? It was a sort of hubristic entitlement of David Cameron, just to think, well, I'll a bit like what Macron has done this week, actually, isn't it? To think, well, I'll use the country as a sort of bouncy ball to get myself out of trouble without really stopping to wonder about the country itself. I'm just wondering about my own position, and I'm going to jeopardize potentially the entire country in the hope of getting myself out of some hot water.
Yeah, my absurdist brain has to sort of turn this into a cartoonish, almost X-Men-esque sort of confrontation. What Cameron and Osborne, and I've watched a sad amount of documentaries about this, did not expect was the blonde, stepping up with the same equal and opposite public school entitlement.
Absolutely.
So self-advance and just pick the other side for a laugh.
I've never seen it that way before, because I've always given Cameron a bit more credit than Johnson. But you're absolutely right. So Cameron was using the country's future very cynically and selfishly in order to try to shore up or improve his own position. And Johnson approached exactly the same moment of jeopardy with one question and one question only in his mind: what's best for me?
There's Born to Rule, Bullingdon Blowhards, opposing each other.
Nice alliteration. Nice alliteration.
James. And I'm sorry to everyone for what my part in all that was, but good grief, it is a billionth, a particulate in the big bang of the entropy and chaos that set in from that moment, and I blame them.
Well, I got some good news for you. You don't need to blame yourself for voting leave. There's loads of benefits. You just have to Google them yourself, because I'm not doing your homework for you. Robbie, have a good day. It's 12:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I was trying to find a little exchange that someone sent me yesterday involving Daily Telegraph journalist and I can't find. Never mind. Tony's in Greenock, in Scotland, obviously. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
It's not a moment in time. It's my everlasting memory of the last 14 years is going to be the continuing and rather frighteningly growing insidious influence of Nigel Farage in the political discourse. I think if he hadn't been in place, things like the demonisation of migration wouldn't have been an issue, as much of an issue as it is. He is effectively dictating the pace on that one and making it an issue that
I mean, what's amazing about the way that the Tories in particular have allowed this to dominate is you can make all of these claims when you're not in power, but if you are in power, if you don't nip them in the bud, then you will be haunted by them. You can't. So privately, everybody knows the importance of immigration to our economy, particularly because of our changing demographics, our ageing population, the need for foreign labour. But what Farage has done is he's created, partly through their cowardice and partly because he's a very good snake oil salesman, they publicly have to pretend that they agree with him. And of course some of them do, the nativist snarlers do agree with him. But privately, everybody knows the economic necessity of relatively high immigration, and yet he's created a sort of parallel universe where no one can say out loud what they know to be true because they're too worried about getting chewed up by the nativist snarlers. Be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. The The Daily Mail have been interesting in turning on him, so almost as if they've finally realised what they've helped to unleash. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But no one can argue with you about the significance of his path to prominence, albeit that the percentage terms, the numbers aren't really that different from what UKIP achieved 9 years ago. 12:54 is the time. Thank you, Tony. Quincy's in Tunbridge Wells. Quincy, what would you like to say?
James, the most significant thing for me is that a mother 5'2" tall.
I'm going to get you on a better phone line, Quincy. It's an important contribution that you're trying to make, and I can't really hear it. Should we have a little listen to Charles Walker? This is Eleanor's nomination for significant moments of the last 14 years, which was Charles Walker MP speaking to the BBC in about October of 2022, which is, I think, very indicative. He was former vice chairman of the 1922 committee. This is quite indicative of the broader vista of chaos that had been ushered in and become relatively normalised by now.
Perfectly honest, this whole affair is inexcusable. It is a pitiful reflection on the Conservative Parliamentary Party at every level. And it reflects really badly, obviously, on the government of the day.
Do you think there's any coming back from this?
I don't think so. But I haven't. I have to say I've been of that view really since two weeks ago. This is an absolute disgrace. As a Tory MP of 17 years, who's never been a minister, who's got on with it loyally most of the time, I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
So you seem quietly...
I'm livid. And, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
I'm sorry, it's very difficult to convey. You look just furious about this.
I am. I've had enough. I've had enough of talentless people putting their tick in the right box, not because it's in the national interest, but because it's in their own personal interest to achieve ministerial position. And I know I speak for hundreds of backbenchers who right now are worrying for their constituents all the time, but now worrying about their own personal circumstances, because there is nothing as an ex-MP. And a lot of my colleagues are wondering, as many of their constituents are wondering, how they're going to pay their mortgages if this all comes to an end soon.
Wow. Great call there by the producer. I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten the significance and the profundity of it, because the idea, we talk a lot about footballification on the programme, the idea that your scarf is tied so tightly around your neck that it's cut off the flow of blood to your brain. Your tribal loyalty to your side, your team colours is such that you exclude all reality. That was Charles Walker essentially describing his own team in terms that even some members of the opposition may have been a little bit shy of deploying. And it is, I think, the polar opposite position of that clip that we've played quite a few times today from another Conservative, this one called Danny or Dunning-Kruger. And what Charles Walker there displays could be described as honesty and indeed integrity. And whatever the opposite of honesty and integrity may be, Danny Kruger displays here.
In power for a long time, and I recognise people feel like it's time for change. Actually, we represent the change that's needed. Labour represent more of the same. They might have different faces, but they would be the ones carrying on the failed British state that has caused so many problems for our country.
So it's just breathtaking, really. Two members of the same party, one describing accurately the language was quite extraordinary about the dangers of promoting stupid people, and then a stupid person, a member of the same party, essentially claiming that if you want to revert, how could you can't even. So it's a failed state. We've been in charge for 14 years. Therefore, you must vote for us and not the other lot. Because if you vote for the other lot, everything will carry on as it currently is. I quite like the fact that is the last comment you're going to hear from me on politics until we have a new government. I am here tomorrow, albeit inexplicably prevented from talking about anything remotely political. But that Charles Walker there, quite a moment. And that is it from me for another day. We will do it all again tomorrow morning from 10. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Would it be plagiarism tomorrow if at 3 o'clock I did History Hour?
Oh, I like that.
It might work, mightn't it?
It absolutely would work. It
I'm
would
not
be lovely.
sure.
James O'Brien on LBC.